Tessa Rook knew the vrakka was afraid before anyone else in the observation theater understood that it was awake. The animal lay inside a transparent restraint chamber at the center of the Soren Institute, a dark mass of folded limbs and silver-edged scales beneath 6 surgical lights. Its head was longer than Tessa's torso. 2 hooked tusks rested against the floor. A membrane covered each of its 4 eyes, giving the audience the comfortable impression that the creature was unconscious. But its hind claws kept pressing into the deck. Not scratching, not testing the glass. Pressing, releasing, and pressing again in a rhythm too steady to be random. Tessa leaned closer to the barrier. Her breath clouded a patch of the chilled material. "It's counting the pulses." Dr. Oren Pell turned one violet eye toward her. The celery biologist stood on 3 narrow legs and wore a white research mantle threaded with rank cords. "The vrakka cannot count." "Then it has excellent timing." The overhead suppression emitters discharged again. A low vibration traveled through the deck, too deep for most of the assembled scientists to hear. Tessa felt it in her molars. The vrakka's claws pushed down at the same instant. Oren's throat fan tightened. Reflex. 28 alien researchers had come to watch humanity's first contribution to the Institute's Predator program. Tessa had expected a field meeting, perhaps a walk through the black glass forest beyond the station perimeter. Instead, Director Caldris Venn had arranged a public demonstration. A captured apex hunter would be awakened, provoked, and subdued while Tessa explained what human-animal handlers might add to celery methods. It felt less like science than an execution with an audience. The vrakka's breathing quickened beneath the lights. Tessa checked the data slate clipped to her gray field jacket. The file described the animal as specimen 12, adult female, 416 kilograms, responsible for 9 deaths. Every line discussed aggression. Nothing described how she had been captured. Nothing recorded whether she had offspring. The dosage log showed enough paralytic in her bloodstream to stop a cargo beast's heart. "How long has she been under suppression?" Tessa asked. 31 local hours, Oren said. "And before that?" "Transport sedation." "How long?" Oren's forelimbs shifted beneath his mantle. 16 hours. Tessa looked through the glass again. A line of dried blue blood marked the vrakka's left shoulder. Metal bulged beneath the scales along the spine. Someone had installed a control stud there and torn it loose. "She's been drugged for 2 days, shocked every 19 seconds, dragged under lights and surrounded by strangers," Tessa said. "If you want my professional opinion, she isn't displaying abnormal aggression. She's having the worst day of her life." A ripple of translation clicks moved through the theater. Some researchers looked offended. Others looked at the animal for the first time rather than at its classification. Director Venn descended the curved aisle. His species, the avar, resembled tall birds sculpted from polished bone, though the resemblance ended at the mouth. 4 mandibles opened beneath his narrow face when he spoke. "Miss Rook was invited because deathworld specialists often mistake sentiment for expertise," he said. "The demonstration will clarify the difference." Tessa was 23, 2 years out of the Terran Wildlife Emergency Corps Academy, and the youngest human ever assigned to Soren. Venn had made sure everyone knew it. He had introduced her as a junior animal attendant despite the rescue citations in her file. He had placed her seat beside the interns. That part did not trouble her, the vrakka did. "You invited me to advise," Tessa said. "My advice is to stop the pulses, lower the lights, and let her wake without an audience. And when she kills the first technician, then you can put that death in the same file where you hid the restraint wound." The theater went silent. Oren stepped between them before Venn could answer. "The wound predates acquisition." Tessa enlarged the capture image on her slate. The control stud was visible in the first scan taken at the Institute dock. The flesh around it was freshly burned. "It predates your acquisition by maybe 3 hours," she said. "Who owned her before you?" Ven's mandibles closed with a dry snap. "No one owns a wild predator." The suppression pulse struck again. This time the vrakka opened all 4 eyes. They were not red, as the public warnings depicted. They were amber and painfully clear. The animal did not lunge at the scientists. It looked straight at the ceiling emitters. Then it turned its head slowly and found Tessa through the barrier. Tessa stopped moving. The vrakka inhaled. Its nostrils widened. She could not smell Tessa through the chamber, but she could see the human's posture. Shoulders lowered, hands open, body angled rather than squared. On Earth, none of that guaranteed safety. It simply told a frightened animal that the person in front of it had not yet chosen violence. "Dim the lights," Tessa said. Ven lifted one clawed hand. A technician activated the stimulant feed instead. The vrakka convulsed. Its torso rose off the deck. 6 limbs unfolded with terrifying speed. The hooked tusks struck the transparent wall, and the theater erupted in startled cries. The material held, but a white fracture line jumped across its lower edge. Tessa spun toward the control booth. "You doubled the stimulant." "We require a representative response," Ven said. The animal struck the barrier again. The crack branched. Oren stared at his console. "Director, chamber integrity is falling." "Increase suppression." "Don't," Tessa said. "The pulses are what she's attacking." Ven ignored her. The next discharge made the lights flicker. The vrakka threw herself upward, not at the audience but at the emitter grid. Her tusks caught a maintenance strut. Metal shrieked. The chamber's upper seal twisted out of alignment. A gap appeared between the wall and the ceiling. For one suspended moment, no one moved. Then an alarm began to howl. The audience surged toward the exits. Oren called for containment. Security shutters dropped over 2 doors, trapping half the researchers inside. The vrakka pushed her narrow skull through the gap and peeled the damaged wall outward. Transparent material bowed like ice beneath a river. Tessa saw an intern fall near the front row. The young celery was named Piri. She had spent the morning asking Tessa questions about elephants, wolves, and whether humans truly allowed predators to sleep in their homes. Now one of her 3 legs was caught between 2 collapsed seats while the crowd climbed over her. The vrakka tore free. Scientists screamed as 400 kilograms of muscle and scale landed in the theater. The animal's head swept from side to side. A tranquilizer bolt struck her shoulder. She whirled and knocked the shooter across the room with her tail. Ven fled behind a descending blast partition. Tessa ran the other way. She jumped the last 3 steps, slid beside Piri and pulled at the bent seat frame. It did not move. Piri's throat fan flashed white with panic. "Leave me," the intern gasped. "That isn't how my species handles paperwork." Tessa planted one boot against the deck and hauled. The frame shifted a few centimeters. Piri pulled her leg free, but the vrakka was already coming toward them. Not charging, stalking head low, tusks spread. 3 security officers appeared on the upper aisle with pulse rifles. "Hold fire," Tessa shouted. The vrakka's eyes fixed on Piri's white flashing throat. The intern made a high involuntary chirp. The predator accelerated. Tessa shoved Piri behind her. She had no weapon. Her emergency kit lay beneath the observation seat. Her hands were empty, just as she had wanted them to be when the animal woke. The vrakka crossed the final distance in 2 bounds. Tessa saw the left tusk pass beside her ribs. The jaws opened. A row of translucent teeth closed around her forearm. Pain arrived as heat rather than impact. The teeth pierced jacket, skin, and muscle. Tessa heard someone shout her name. The floor tilted, and she was on one knee with the vrakka above her. The animal could have torn her arm off. It did not. Its jaws held for one heartbeat, 2, 3. Amber eyes watched her face. Then the vrakka released and stepped back. 2 dark punctures welled with blood. Every scientist in the theater knew what those punctures meant. Vrakka venom destroyed neural tissue in under 90 seconds. The Institute had recorded it killing 6 species. There was no antivenom because the toxin changed shape when exposed to foreign blood. Security training taught only one response to a bite: isolate the victim before terminal convulsions began. Oren reached Tessa first. He dropped beside her, scanning wand trembling in his grip. 72 seconds, he said. Until what? Respiratory collapse. That's inconvenient. Her attempt at humor came out thin. Fire spread from her forearm to her shoulder. The wound pulsed as if a second heart had awakened inside it. Security formed a firing line around the vrakka. The animal could have attacked. Instead, she stood 10 meters away, staring at Tessa. Her claws pressed and released against the floor. Counting. Clear the room, Ven ordered over the speakers. Prepare incineration. Oren's throat fan darkened. The human is still inside. The human is already dead. Tessa looked at the timer on Oren's scanner. 58 seconds. Piri knelt behind her, hands pressed over her mouth. I'm sorry. You didn't bite me. 49 seconds. Tessa's fingertips went numb. Her vision tightened at the edges. The vrakka lowered her head and took one step closer. Rifles rose. Don't shoot, Tessa said. Miss Rook, the animal has envenomated you, Oren replied. It let go. That distinction has no medical value. It does to her. 37 seconds. The vrakka walked forward. Each step was careful. Tessa saw blood on one translucent tooth and behind it a smaller set of pale structures folding out from the gum. Not teeth, gland spines. The animal stopped within reach. Oren froze. Security shouted for Tessa to move away. She could not have moved if she wanted to. Her legs had become distant objects. She kept her bitten arm low and held out her other hand. You made your point, she whispered. What comes next? The vrakka sniffed her palm. 22 seconds. Then the predator seized Tessa's wounded arm again. Piri screamed. Oren struck at the animal with his scanner. The vrakka ignored him. The smaller gum spines pressed into the original punctures. Cold flooded Tessa's arm. The grip lasted less than a second. The vrakka withdrew and turned sideways, placing her armored body between Tessa and the rifles. The countdown reached 0. Nothing happened. Tessa dragged air into her lungs. The burning sensation receded from her shoulder. Feeling returned to her fingers in a wave of needles. Oren stared at the scan, reset it, and stared again. Neural activity stable, he said. The room remained silent except for the alarm. That is not possible, another scientist whispered. Tessa's legs failed at last. She sat hard on the deck. The vrakka glanced down at her and released a low sound that vibrated through Tessa's ribs. It did not sound like a threat. It sounded like an answer. Oren drew a sample from the wound with shaking hands. The fluid in the vial separated into 2 colors, black from the first bite and luminous gold from the second. The toxin is inactive, he said. Something dismantled it. Ven's voice returned over the speaker, sharper now. Security, kill the specimen and quarantine the human. The vrakka's scales lifted. Tessa forced herself upright. She placed her good hand against the animal's neck. The scales were colder than she expected, and beneath them the muscles trembled so violently that her palm bounced. She's not trying to kill us, Tessa said. She's trying to show us what you never waited to see. The nearest security officer lowered his rifle a fraction. Ven snapped an order in Avar command code. Red targeting beams converged on the vrakka's chest. Tessa stepped in front of them. If you fire, she said. "You'll have to explain to Earth why you shot through me after your director tried to stage a lethal demonstration." "You are contaminated," Ven replied. "Then you should be very careful about making me angry." It was a reckless bluff, but the security officers had seen the impossible happen at arm's length. None of them wanted to discover what human blood did after a vrakka bite. Oren found his voice. "Director, scientific quarantine protocol grants medical authority precedence. I am assuming custody of both subjects." "You do not have that authority. The bite created an unclassified biological event. Under Institute law, I do." Ven went quiet. The blast partition behind him had trapped him in a secure booth overlooking the theater. Tessa could see his pale face through the narrow window. His mandibles moved as he opened a private channel. She suspected he was not calling a lawyer. The vrakka turned toward the western wall. Her nostrils widened. She released the same low vibration, but this time something answered from beneath the floor. 3 faint knocks. The animal struck the deck with one hooked claw. 3 knocks came again. Oren looked at the structural display. "There is no occupied chamber below us." Tessa remembered the missing lines in the acquisition report, the fresh control wound, and Ven's insistence that no one had owned the predator. "Show me the sublevel map," she said. Oren projected it. Storage rooms and maintenance corridors glowed beneath the theater. One section appeared as a blank gray rectangle labeled Environmental Service Void. The vrakka struck the floor hard enough to dent it. The answer came faster now. "Not 3 knocks. Many." Piri stared at the blank section. "There are animals down there." Tessa met Oren's eyes. "How many specimens does your official inventory list?" 12. "And how many have you shown me?" 1. Ven's booth door opened behind the partition. He was leaving. Tessa pointed. "Don't let him reach the sublevels." 2 security officers hesitated. The third, a broad roan named Sergeant Varro, turned his rifle away from the vrakka and fired at the booth controls. Sparks burst from the panel. The door slammed shut on Ven's trailing mantle. "Medical custody," Varro said. "I heard the doctor." Oren gave him a grateful look. The Institute lights shifted from white to amber. A new alarm replaced the containment warning, slower and more severe. "Purification sequence initiated," the translator announced. "SUBLEVEL biological ASSETS will be sterilized in 9 minutes. Ven had reached another terminal. The vrakka roared. The sound hit the theater like a physical blow. Piri folded her throat fan. Oren stumbled. The transparent chamber wall finally collapsed behind the animal in a rain of blunt fragments. Tessa kept her hand on the vrakka's neck until the roar ended. "You have babies down there," she said. The amber eyes turned toward her. "I don't know if you understand every word. I don't know what that second bite did either, but I know what 9 minutes means." She looked at Oren, Piri, and the 3 officers who had stopped pointing weapons at the wrong creature. "Open the floor." Oren pulled up the maintenance controls. "The sublevel is sealed from the main network." "Physical access." "A freight lift beyond the Western laboratory." "How many locked doors?" 4. Sergeant Varro checked his rifle. "Not anymore." They moved through the wrecked theater together. The vrakka limped at Tessa's side, favoring the shoulder where the control stud had been torn loose. Every few steps, the animal's flank brushed Tessa's hip as if confirming she had not fallen. Tessa's bitten arm still ached, but the pain no longer spread. Oren walked backward while scanning her blood. His expression grew more confused with every reading. "The neutralizing secretion did not simply bind the venom," he said. "It instructed your immune cells to disassemble it." "Can my immune cells read instructions?" "They should not be able to read these." Maybe the vrakka speaks better human than we speak vrakka. Piri made a startled clicking sound that Tessa realized was laughter. The purification timer reached 7 minutes as they entered the Western laboratory. Empty examination tables stood beneath hanging restraints. Cabinets had been stripped of labels. A drain in the center of the floor was stained with blue blood. The vrakka stopped beside one table and smelled its edge. Her claws gouged the deck. Tessa saw a row of narrow metal cases against the wall. One stood open. Inside lay dozens of spinal control studs identical to the broken device in the animal's shoulder. Oren's throat fan turned gray. These are prohibited behavior anchors. You recognize them. From war crimes archives. They stimulate pain and rage responses, then condition the subject to associate relief with a command signal. The technology was outlawed a century ago. Sergeant Varro took a recording. Director Venn called them tracking studs in the security brief. The vrakka shoved her head beneath the freight lift door. Varro fired twice into the locking mechanism. The door released. Together, the animal and the officer forced it upward. A breath of hot, damp air rose from below, carrying musk, antiseptic, and fear. The vrakka went rigid. Far beneath them, something small cried out. The predator looked at Tessa. No translation device was needed. We're coming, Tessa said. The lift had been disabled, so they climbed down the service ladder beside the shaft. Varro went first. Piri followed despite Oren ordering her to stay above. Tessa descended one-handed, slow enough that the vrakka paced and snarled at the opening until she reached the bottom. The animal did not use the ladder. She hooked her claws into the shaft walls and flowed down the vertical surface with unnerving grace. 5 minutes remained. The hidden level extended farther than the official map suggested. Rows of sealed doors lined a central corridor. Through the first window Tessa saw a vrakka juvenile curled beneath a restraint web. Through the next, 2 adults lay motionless with tubes entering their necks. Other rooms contained species she did not recognize. Winged hunters, armored burrowers, a translucent creature floating in a nutrient column. This was not a predator study. It was a weapon factory. Oren accessed a local terminal. Files spilled across the screen before an automatic purge began deleting them. Project Aegis Fang, he read. Adaptive venoms, conditioned attack behavior, species-specific immunological keys. Director authorization Caldrus Venn. Funding source obscured. Tessa looked at the gold, still glimmering around her wounds. Species-specific keys, she said. The second bite. Oren scanned faster. The vrakka's first secretion marks a threat. The second can reverse the effect if the animal chooses to revoke the mark. Venn's team separated the compounds. They wanted a poison that could be activated or canceled by command. But she chose. Yes. That single word condemned the entire Institute program. A chemical reflex could be harvested. A choice belonged to a mind. The purification timer reached 3 minutes. Metal shutters began descending over the specimen rooms. Orange light flooded the corridor. A voice warned of thermal sterilization. Varro fired at the nearest control bank. The shutters stopped for half a second, then continued. There are 43 cells, Piri said. We cannot open them all. The adult vrakka ran to the juvenile's door and struck it with both tusks. The frame bent but did not break. Tessa studied the corridor. Every cell fed into a central waste channel beneath the floor. The sterilization system would flood them with heated oxidizer from pipes in the ceiling. The same pipes converged at a pressure manifold behind the terminal. Varro, can your rifle rupture that manifold? Yes, it will fill this corridor instead. Not if the waste channel is open. Oren understood. Reverse the pressure into the disposal system. It may trigger the emergency doors. I have never sabotaged a secret laboratory before. First time for everything. They moved. Peary crawled beneath the terminal and pulled manual relays. Orin rerouted valves with all four hands. Varro placed concentrated shots into the manifold housing. Tessa found the waste channel wheel, but it had been welded in place. The timer showed 68 seconds. The vrakka left the juvenile's door and came to Tessa. She smelled the wheel, then wedged one tusk through its spokes. On three, Tessa said. Human and predator pulled together. The first attempt tore skin from Tessa's palm. The second cracked the weld. On the third, the wheel turned and a deep channel opened down the center of the corridor. Now, Orin called. Varro fired. The manifold burst. A wave of orange vapor blasted outward, hit the open channel and plunged beneath the floor. Alarms shrieked. Emergency shutters reversed. Cell locks released with a rolling series of clacks. The juvenile vrakka tumbled into the corridor. The adult reached it in one bound. She pressed her tusks around the smaller animal without touching it and made a rapid sequence of chest-deep clicks. The juvenile answered, scrambling beneath her body. Other doors opened. The hidden predators did not rush the rescuers. Drugged and injured, they crept or crawled into the corridor. Several recoiled from the vrakka. She positioned herself between them and her young, then looked to Tessa again. The timer reached 0. Somewhere beneath them, the diverted oxidizer ignited. The floor jumped. Flame roared through the waste channel toward the central furnace. The pressure wave threw Tessa against a cell door. Lights vanished. In the darkness, animals cried out and metal tore. Emergency illumination returned in red pulses. The far end of the corridor had collapsed. Orin checked the lift shaft. Smoke poured down it. The primary exit is blocked. Varro opened a station schematic. There is a drainage tunnel leading beyond the perimeter, 12 kilometers. Through the black glass forest, Peary said. The forest was where the Institute claimed vrakka packs hunted anything that moved. Tessa looked at the adult beside her. The juvenile pressed against its mother's forelegs. Behind them waited 41 frightened creatures engineered, shocked, and classified as monsters. Good, Tessa said, we have a guide. The drainage tunnel had been designed for liquids, not refugees. Its ceiling forced Sergeant Varro to hunch. Warm water reached Tessa's ankles and carried ash away from the burning sublevel. The rescued creatures moved badly at first. Sedatives dragged at their limbs, and behavior anchors flashed beneath several hides whenever the emergency lights pulsed. Orin stopped long enough to remove a metal band from the winged hunter's neck, but there were too many implants and too little time. The adult vrakka led with her juvenile beneath her chest. She paused at every junction, smelled the air, and chose a route before Varro's map finished updating. Tessa stayed near her shoulder. The second bite had stopped the venom, yet it had not restored the blood lost from the first. Each ladder rung and uneven step made the tunnel narrow around her. Orin kept trying to order her onto a portable litter. If I lie down, the big one stops, Tessa said. You require medical treatment. So does everyone behind us. You are displaying the human habit of treating self-destruction as leadership. We call it prioritization. Your word does not improve the habit. Peary walked between them carrying the juvenile burrower in her upper arms. The little animal had plated skin and a face like a shovel. It had tried to bite her twice, but its teeth were too soft to break her glove. Is this what humans mean when they say animals trust you? Peary asked. No, that's what we mean when we say it has run out of better options. The vrakka stopped. Her dorsal scales rose one after another from tail to neck. Tessa heard nothing except moving water and the scrape of claws. Then the control wound in the animal's shoulder contracted. A blue spark jumped beneath the scales. The vrakka screamed and spun. Her tail struck the tunnel wall. Predators scattered. The juvenile rolled into the water. Tessa reached for it, but the adult snapped at her face. Teeth stopped a hand's width from her cheek. The restraint implant was still inside. "Command signal," Oren said. "Someone has activated the anchor remotely." The vrakka shook so violently that her tusks rattled against the floor. A second spark traveled along her spine. Her eyes lost focus. She lunged at Sergeant Varro. Tessa caught the broken control stud with both hands. The metal burned her palms. She pulled backward, using her weight rather than her injured arm. The implant did not move. The vrakka twisted, and one foreleg knocked Tessa into the tunnel wall. Her head struck stone. Varro raised his rifle, but did not fire. "Hold her for 3 seconds, Tessa gasped. "That is a very large request." "You're a very large officer." Varro threw himself across the vrakka's shoulders. His species had evolved under twice Earth's gravity, and he was strong enough to bend maintenance steel. The vrakka carried him 2 steps before her claws lost purchase. Oren opened his field kit. "The anchor has barbs around the spinal sheath. If we tear it free, we may paralyze her." "Then turn it off." "I need access to the transmitter protocol." Piri lifted the data cartridge she had stolen from the hidden terminal. "I copied the local command archive." Oren connected it to his scanner. Lines of code flooded the display. The next pulse struck before he found the right sequence. The vrakka threw Varro into the wall. She came down over Tessa, jaws open. Tessa did not retreat. She reached between the tusks and placed her bleeding hand against the animal's nose. "He wants you to prove his story," she said. "Make him a liar." The jaws trembled. Tessa had no reason to believe the vrakka understood the words. Tone might matter. Sense certainly did. Her blood carried both secretions now, the threat mark and its cancellation, evidence that this animal had chosen to spare her. The amber eyes cleared for a moment. "Found it," Oren said. He transmitted a string of commands. The blue light beneath the vrakka's scales went dark. Her legs folded. Tessa dropped with her and kept a hand on her snout until the shaking eased. The juvenile crawled from the water, climbed across its mother's foreleg, and pressed its small face beneath her jaw. Varro sat against the wall, breathing hard. "Director Vin knows where we are." "He knows where the implant is," Tessa said. "Can we make it tell him we're going somewhere else?" Piri's throat fan brightened. "The disposal furnace." Oren studied her. "You propose sending the anchor's identification pulse from the furnace we just damaged. He will think they burned. You have been listening to the human for too long." "Thank you." They could not remove the implant, but Oren changed its outgoing address. The next tracking response leaped through the Institute network and vanished into the fire behind them. For anyone watching the central system, Specimen 12 died in the sterilization blast. The vrakka rose several minutes later. Her balance remained poor, but she continued without urging. The tunnel descended beneath the Institute's outer wall. Vegetation roots broke through the ceiling, black and translucent as cooled glass. The water became colder. Blue insects floated above it, each with wings that opened and closed in perfect silence. The animals behind them began choosing side passages. The winged hunter climbed through a crack toward open air. 3 armored burrowers followed a root tunnel. Oren tried to stop them until Tessa touched his arm. "They know this ground better than we do. They carry behavior anchors. Then record where they go and help later. Keeping them in a frightened crowd won't make them safer." One by one, the rescued creatures disappeared into the drainage network. Some looked back. Most did not. Freedom was not gratitude, and Tessa preferred it that way. Only the vrakka pair stayed with the people. The tunnel ended at a grate beneath a waterfall. Varro cut through it with a rifle beam. Morning light poured into the dark passage, green and silver after the Institute's red alarms. The black glass forest covered the valley beyond. At first glance, its trees looked burned. Their trunks were dark mineral columns, branching into translucent leaves that chimed when the wind moved through them. Pale vines hung between the crowns. Pools reflected a sky with two small moons and the distant curve of Sauron's orbital refinery. Tessa climbed out and filled her lungs with cold air. The vrakka did not follow immediately. She stood at the tunnel mouth and smelled the valley. The juvenile pressed against her. Both animals stared toward the eastern ridge, where columns of smoke rose from the Institute. "Home?" Tessa asked. The adult turned west. Far away, a low call moved through the forest. Another answered, then another. The sounds were too deep for Tessa to hear clearly, but the gold fluid around her wound vibrated beneath the bandage. Oren's scanner chirped. "Your blood chemistry is changing again." "Good changing." "There is no scientific category called good changing." "There should be." He showed her the display. Human immune cells had formed temporary receptors around fragments of the vrakka's neutralizing compound. Each receptor opened when the distant calls passed through the ground. "The secretion reacts to infrasonic communication," Oren said. "It may allow the animal to identify whether a marked target is still considered a threat by the pack." Tessa looked west, where the calls continued. "They're asking if she came back alone." "That interpretation exceeds our evidence." The adult answered with a vibration Tessa felt in her knees. Calls erupted across the valley. Oren stared at his scanner. "I withdraw the objection." Piri laughed again. Their relief lasted less than a minute. 3 security aircraft rose beyond the ridge. They flew Institute colors, white hulls striped in amber, but their weapon ports were open. A public emergency broadcast followed. "Attention all personnel. A xenobiological breach has released weaponized predators into the Sauron Reserve. The human observer Tessa Rook is infected and displaying coercive symptoms. Do not approach. Lethal containment is authorized." Ven's face appeared above the valley in a projected warning. He looked solemn, injured, and completely in control. "The Institute mourns those lost because an inexperienced off-world handler interfered with proven safety procedures," he said. "We will protect neighboring settlements from this human error." Tessa listened to herself become the villain. Piri's throat fan darkened with anger. "There are recordings from the theater." "Ven controls the station network," Varro said. "He will release edited fragments." "I have the hidden laboratory archive," Piri replied. "And no transmitter strong enough to reach beyond the valley." Oren checked the aircraft. "They are deploying thermal drones. If Ven believes the vrakka burned, why authorize a forest purge?" Tessa looked at the rising aircraft, then at the black glass trees. Because this was never about one animal. She remembered the acquisition file. Specimen 12 had been captured beyond the Western Survey boundary, an area the Institute had recently petitioned to reclassify for mineral development. The petition claimed vrakka attacks made civilian research impossible. 9 deaths, 43 illegal specimens, control anchors designed to provoke rage, a public demonstration scheduled on the same day as the reclassification vote. "He needs the forest declared hostile," she said. "The attacks justify clearing it. The weapon data pays for the operation." Varro accessed the reserve map. The western range contains prismium deposits, enough to finance a sector fleet. "Who owns the extraction rights?" Piri searched the Coppet archive. A shell company's name appeared, followed by 6 nested ownership trusts. The final beneficiary was hidden, but one authorization key carried Ven's personal seal. The first thermal drone crossed the ridge. The vrakka roared. Calls answered from the forest, no longer distant. Dark shapes moved between the glass trees. "How many?" Varro asked. Oren scanned. "At least 30 adults, more arriving." The director had sent armed machines into the center of a pack that now believed its captured female and young were alive. Tessa watched a drone descend toward the waterfall. Its sensor turned, found the 4 fugitives, and painted them with red light. The vrakka prepared to leap. "Wait," Tessa said. The animal's muscles stayed coiled. The drone broadcast a surrender order, then launched a restraint net before the words finished translating. Tessa ducked. Varro fired. The net generator exploded in the air, showering the pool with sparks. The drone banked away, marking their location for the aircraft. The vrakka sprang after it. She climbed a black trunk in 3 strides, launched from a branch, and struck the drone 20 meters above the ground. Tusks pierced the fuselage. Predator and machine crashed into the pool. The vrakka surfaced with metal between her jaws. She shook it once, broke the frame, and carried one half onto shore. Piri stared. Was that restraint? For a vrakka, Tessa said, probably. The aircraft split formation. 1 pursued the fugitives. 2 flew deeper into the forest, dropping beacons that attached to the trees and began emitting the 19-second suppression pulse. The entire valley changed. Leaves chimed out of rhythm. Calls turned to roars. Vrakka shapes slammed into trunks, biting at invisible pain. The anchors implanted in captured animals were not the only control mechanism. Ven had tuned the beacons to the species' sensory range. "He wants an attack," Oren said. "He wants pictures of one," Tessa replied. The aircraft cameras were already transmitting. If the pack charged the neighboring settlement, Ven would have the evidence he needed. Planetary security would burn the valley from orbit and thank him for the warning. Tessa pulled the ruined drone from the water. Its transmitter still blinked. "Can this reach the public network?" Piri opened the casing. "If we restore the antenna." "How long?" 10 minutes. An aircraft dropped below the canopy and fired a warning burst. Glass leaves exploded around them. "You have 3, Varro said. They ran west. The vrakka moved ahead, using her body to knock branches away from the juvenile. Pack members appeared on either side of the group. Some were smaller, marked with pale stripes. Others carried scars from traps. None attacked the people while the rescued female remained beside Tessa. The forest floor began to vibrate under the suppression beacons. Tessa's wound burned in answer. The pack's movements grew erratic. One young male charged Varro, stopped as the adult female struck him sideways, then fled with a confused cry. "The signal is separating threat from recognition," Oren said. "It is overriding pack identification. Can my blood help you build a countersignal?" "Possibly in a laboratory." "We left the bad laboratory. Improvise." Oren collected a fresh sample while they moved. Piri repaired the drone against Varro's back, using his armor as a work surface. Tessa followed the vrakka toward a line of cliffs where glass trees grew from vertical stone. The pursuing aircraft fired again. This burst struck an adult vrakka in the hindquarters. The animal rolled, recovered, and vanished beneath the roots. The pack scattered. The rescued female did not. She turned toward the aircraft and exposed her tusks. Tessa caught the scales at her neck. "Not that way." The vrakka pulled once. Tessa held on. "They're faster in open air. Make them come where you are faster." She pointed toward the cliff shadows. The animal looked from Tessa to the aircraft. Then she lifted the juvenile in her jaws with astonishing gentleness and ran beneath the cliff. The others followed. The aircraft descended after them. Its pilot expected frightened animals. The vrakka pack gave him an empty ravine. Predators vanished into cracks, beneath overhangs, and behind curtains of pale vine. Tessa, Oren, Piri, and Varro pressed into a narrow cleft while the machine slowed to search. "Transmitter ready," Piri whispered. "Send everything," Tessa said. "Ven will block it." Not to the Institute. Emergency broadcast on the human diplomatic band. The Terran ship is beyond the moon. Terran emergency bands repeat through every receiver that hears them. He can block a message. He cannot block thousands of copies without shutting down the planet. Piri connected the data archive and activated the drone. The signal rose. The aircraft detected it at once. Weapon ports turned toward the cleft. The vrakka female emerged on a ledge above the machine. She did not leap at the cockpit. She struck the cliff with both foreclaws. Black glass stone fractured along a hidden seam. A sheet of crystal slid downward and smashed across the aircraft's right wing. The pilot fought for altitude. More vrakka erupted from the shadows, not attacking the vehicle but driving it toward a narrow gap between stone pillars. The aircraft entered the gap. The pack struck both pillars. Stone closed like jaws. The aircraft crashed into the ravine floor. Its emergency field deployed, saving the crew but pinning the machine beneath crystal debris. Tessa ran to the wreck before the vrakka could decide what to do with it. Two security pilots hung inside the tilted cockpit. One was unconscious. The other raised a sidearm when Tessa appeared. "You're infected," he said. "You're upside down. We all have problems." She opened the emergency latch. The pilot kept the weapon pointed at her until a vrakka head appeared behind her shoulder. He released it very carefully. Varro pulled both pilots free. Tessa checked the unconscious officer, found a pulse, and dragged him away from leaking fuel. The vrakka watched, clicking among themselves. The repaired drone continued transmitting from Piri's hands. "Archive upload at 30%, she said. The other two aircraft turned back toward them. Ven's voice entered every receiver. "Sergeant Varro, terminate the infected human and recover the data. I will consider your cooperation during trial." Varro picked up the pilot's sidearm and crushed it beneath one heavy boot. "Consider that," he said. The aircraft opened fire. The pack broke in every direction. Tessa covered the injured pilot with her body as pulse rounds cut molten lines through the ravine. Varro returned fire. Orin pulled the unconscious officer behind the wreck. Piri stood in the open, protecting the transmitter. 70%. A round struck the drone casing. Piri spun and fell. Tessa reached her. Blue blood spread across the intern's mantle. The transmitter lay several meters away, still blinking. "Stay with me," Tessa said. Piri's throat fan fluttered. "Upload. Orin will finish it. He is a terrible engineer." The doctor shouted that he could hear her. Tessa pressed a bandage over the wound. It had passed through the upper shoulder, missing the central air sac by centimeters. Piri would live if they stopped the bleeding. The vrakka juvenile crept from beneath its mother and approached. It smelled Piri's blood, then made a soft clicking sound. The adult nudged it back, but did not threaten the wounded intern. Orin crawled to the transmitter, 92%. The nearest aircraft lined up for another pass. Every vrakka in the ravine rose at once. The suppression pulse struck. They staggered, but none fled. The rescued female answered with a call that traveled through the stone. The pack spread along both walls, choosing positions. Tessa realized they were not simply hunting together. They were coordinating angles, timing, and risk. The aircraft descended. "Upload complete," Orin said. Tessa grabbed the transmitter and switched to the open diplomatic channel. "This is Tessa Rook, Terran Wildlife Emergency Corps. The Soren Institute is operating an illegal predator weapon program under Director Caldris Ven. Evidence follows. We have wounded personnel and protected native animals under fire. Any vessel receiving this message, repeat it." For 2 seconds, only static answered. Then a mining ship repeated the message. A weather station repeated it. The neighboring settlement repeated it. Dozens of civilian receivers began carrying Peary's archive beyond Ven's control. The aircraft fired. Vrakka leaped from both walls. They struck wings, landing struts, and sensor housings, never the cockpit. One animal fell. 3 more replaced it. The pilot climbed, but the ravine offered no room to turn. The rescued female landed on the aircraft's back and drove one tusk through the suppression transmitter. The pulse stopped. Across the forest, the remaining beacons went silent. The pack released a rolling call that shook dust from the cliffs. The aircraft pilot surrendered. The third machine fled toward the Institute. Tessa watched it disappear over the trees. Ven knows the evidence is out. Varro looked east. He will destroy what remains before investigators arrive. The Institute contained the original research servers, dozens of staff who might testify, and an underground menagerie no one had fully searched. It also controlled the orbital refinery's emergency defense link. If Ven could convince planetary security that the broadcast was a human contamination event, he might still order the valley sterilized. Oren sealed Peary's wound. Your ship will receive the message. The Wayfinder is 40 minutes from orbit, Tessa said. What can Ven do in 40 minutes? The answer appeared in the sky. The orbital refinery shifted. Its mirror arrays rotated away from the sun and aligned over the western valley. The same mirrors that powered 3 settlements could focus enough heat to turn the black glass forest into a lake. An evacuation warning spread across civilian channels. Forest purification authorized. Impact in 34 minutes. The vrakka did not understand the words, but they saw every human and alien face turn upward. Tessa's rescued female pressed close to her juvenile. The pack began to call. Thousands of answers rolled from the forest. Not 30 animals, not 100. The valley was alive with them. Ven had ordered the death of a species to erase his laboratory. Tessa stood beside Peary's stretcher and looked toward the Institute. We go back, she said. No one argued that returning to the Institute was safe. Sergeant Varro argued that it was possible, which mattered more. The drainage shaft had collapsed, and Ven would be watching every road. The vrakka offered another route. Their calls passed west to east in overlapping waves. Adults vanished into the forest and returned with mud on their forelegs. The rescued female walked to a root-covered opening at the base of the cliff and waited. A den tunnel, Tessa said. Oren scanned it. The passage extends toward the Institute ridge. How close? The mineral density interferes after 9 kilometers. Close enough. Peary could not travel. The surviving pilots volunteered to carry her toward the settlement after hearing their own command recordings in the leaked archive. One of them, Lieutenant Hesk, removed his Institute insignia and gave Varro the aircraft's encrypted access key. Ven used a priority code tied to planetary defense, Hesk said. He told us the human was spreading a behavioral pathogen. Did you believe him? Tessa asked. Hesk looked at Peary's bandaged shoulder. I believed the part that made obedience easier. It was not an excuse. He did not present it as one. Tessa accepted the key. Then make the next part harder. Get her out. The vrakka juvenile tried to follow Peary's litter. Its mother blocked it, gently but firmly, then turned toward the den tunnel. The small animal chirped until Peary lifted one shaking hand in farewell. I still have questions about elephants, she told Tessa. Stay alive. Humans have too many elephant facts to waste. Peary's throat fan warmed to lavender. The pilots carried her south. Tessa, Oren, Varro, the adult vrakka, and her young entered the earth. The passage smelled of damp minerals and old fur. It widened beneath the cliff into a network of chambers polished by generations of scaled bodies. Bones lay arranged along certain walls, not scattered after feeding. Long bones occupied one alcove, skulls another. Pieces of metal and glass formed careful lines in the floor. Oren stopped beside a pattern of black stones surrounding a rusted control stud. "This device predates Ven's project," he said. "How old?" "At least 80 years. The vrakka female touched the stud with one claw and growled. Tessa examined the arrangement. 12 stones, one broken device. Blue mineral dust filled grooves leading from it toward a small mound. "A grave," she said. Oren's scanner detected bone beneath the soil. The Institute had classified every arrangement found in vrakka territory as nesting debris. The word relieved researchers from asking why objects had been sorted, preserved, or buried. Tessa thought of Earth history: elephants returning to bones, crows leaving objects, whales carrying dead calves through the ocean. Humans had repeatedly discovered intelligence only after deciding what it ought to look like. "Record everything," she said. Oren did. His movements were careful now. Farther inside, the tunnel forked around a nursery chamber. 4 vrakka juveniles watched from a ledge while 2 adults guarded them. The rescued female approached. Pack members smelled her control wound and the chemical traces on her hide. Then they smelled Tessa. The den filled with low clicks. Tessa's bitten arm tingled. Not words, not thoughts. Her immune receptors responded to the vibration, changing the temperature around the punctures. Warm when the clicks came from the rescued female. Cold when an unfamiliar male approached. The second secretion was functioning like a temporary scent badge inside her blood. She lowered herself to one knee. The male vrakka came close enough that his breath moved her hair. He touched one tusk to the wound without breaking the bandage. The cold faded. "Apparently I passed," Tessa whispered. "Do not assume the examination is complete," Oren replied from several meters back. "You can come closer. My scientific judgment places me exactly here." Varro rumbled with amusement. The rescued juvenile joined the others. Its mother watched until the small bodies disappeared deeper into the nursery. Then she turned toward the eastern tunnel without them. Tessa understood the choice. The mother could leave her young in safety now. She was returning to the place that had hurt her because the danger still threatened the pack. "We need a name for her," Varro said. "She has one," Tessa replied. "We just don't know it." Oren replayed the female's recurring call, a deep double pulse followed by 3 shorter clicks. The acoustic pattern is consistent when others address her. Tessa tried to reproduce it, and produced a sound like a damaged engine. The female looked back with what might have been concern. "I'll work on it," Tessa said. They traveled beneath the forest while the purification countdown fell through 20 minutes. Twice, tunnels trembled as Institute aircraft struck entrances behind them. Ven had begun sealing the den network. The access key from Hesk opened a defense channel. Planetary authorities were arguing in real time. The settlement governor demanded cancellation. Ven claimed the Kopid archive was fabricated by a human neurotoxin. A refinery controller insisted the mirror command carried valid emergency authorization and could be interrupted only from the Institute or the orbital platform. Earth's ship Wayfinder joined the channel at the edge of the system. Captain Amani Rook's voice cut through the overlapping accusations. She was Tessa's aunt, though she never used family channels during an operation. Sarin Control, Terran Vessel Wayfinder, requests immediate suspension of the thermal strike pending independent review. Ven replied before the governor. "Terran Vessel, your citizen caused the breach and is biologically compromised. Entry into planetary space will be treated as hostile interference. Director Ven, I have watched 6 recordings of you ordering personnel to shoot her. If this is how your institute requests scientific cooperation, I understand why your staff retention is poor." Tessa smiled despite herself. "Wayfinder," she transmitted, "this is Rook Field 1. Silence lasted half a heartbeat. Field 1 report. Alive, bitten, not controlled, traveling to Institute through native den tunnels with Dr. Orrin Pell and Sergeant Varro. Peary is wounded but evacuated. We have evidence of intelligence in the vrakka population and an active extinction order based on falsified data. Captain Rook's professionalism tightened around fear. Medical condition. Stable, weird but stable. Define weird. The predator changed its mind and gave me an antidote. For once, her aunt had no immediate response. Ven entered the channel. This exchange demonstrates cognitive contamination. The human interprets instinctive secretion as moral agency. Orrin activated his scanner record. Director, I am transmitting chemical evidence that the second secretion required deliberate gland engagement after the animal approached the envenomated target. I am also transmitting 80 years of curated burial structures from a vrakka den. Your classification is untenable. Dr. Pell, your access is revoked. My eyesight remains operational. Varro added the security footage of Ven's stimulant order. Public channels began repeating the evidence. The planetary assembly called an emergency session, but the mirror array remained aligned, now 15 minutes from focus. The authorization is locked through Ven's biometric key, Captain Rook said. We can disable the refinery, but debris could fall on 2 settlements. Don't fire, Tessa replied. I wasn't asking permission. I was explaining why I haven't fired yet. The vrakka stopped beneath a vertical shaft. Above them lay the Institute's original geothermal intake, constructed before the modern laboratories. Orrin's map showed the shaft opening inside the power core, 2 levels below Ven's command center. 11 minutes, Varro said. The climb was nearly vertical. Vrakka claws found holds in rough stone. Varro used maintenance brackets. Orrin struggled with the angle, and Tessa's wounded arm could no longer support her full weight. The female climbed above Tessa, braced her hind limbs, and lowered her tail. You cannot be serious, Orrin said. Tessa wrapped the tail around her good forearm. She seemed serious. The vrakka pulled her upward. At the top, a heat grate separated them from the intake chamber. Varro cut the bolts. The female lifted the grate quietly with her tusks and set it aside. They emerged behind 3 technicians, who were preparing to overload the geothermal pumps. The technicians saw the vrakka and reached for alarms. Varro aimed his rifle. Hands visible, he said. No one needs another demonstration. 1 technician obeyed. Another hit the alarm anyway. The 3rd ran toward the pump controls. Orrin tackled him with surprising speed. The Institute locked down. Bulkhead doors sealed. Lights flashed amber. Ven announced that infected creatures had breached the core and authorized lethal force without warning. Subtle entrance, Tessa told Varro. It worked until the doctor attacked someone. Orrin kept the technician pinned with 2 hands while using the other 2 to access the console. I am expanding my professional range. The captured workers had been told the hidden sublevel contained diseased animals confiscated from smugglers. 2 looked horrified when Orrin showed them the archived procedures. The 3rd refused to watch. The director says off-world competitors forged those files, he insisted. Tessa pointed to the vrakka's burned shoulder. Did competitors forge that? It is an animal. The female's amber eyes narrowed. She understands tone, Tessa said. I suggest a better one. 8 minutes remained. The mirror authorization could be cancelled at the command center, but Ven had sealed the lifts. The geothermal control network offered another option. If they reduced Institute power below emergency minimum, its priority command link would disconnect from the refinery. The same outage would disable ventilation in the surviving specimen chambers. How many are still below? Tessa asked. Oren searched the inventory. At least 19. The purge opened some cells, but internal seals may have trapped them after the explosion. Then no blackout. We could restore ventilation manually after the link breaks, Varro said. How long? 6 minutes if every corridor is clear. They have 8 minutes until the strike. The animals have less than that without air. The power system forced the choice Ven wanted. Sacrifice the forest or sacrifice the evidence beneath the Institute. Tessa studied the schematic. Command traffic left through a dedicated optical spine. Power protected it, but data traveled through a cable crossing the geothermal chamber before rising to the roof. Can we cut the command link without cutting power? Oren highlighted the spine. The cable is inside a pressure conduit carrying superheated coolant. Of course it is. Varro examined the conduit. A rifle shot would rupture the chamber. The vrakka smelled the metal and scratched once at a service hatch. Behind it, coolant valves converged around the optical spine. The space was too narrow for Varro, too hot for Oren's species, and flooded with radiation that would blind their eyes. Tessa's human skin and redundant vision could tolerate perhaps 2 minutes in protective gear. The cable lay 12 meters inside. No, Captain Rook said when Tessa explained over comms. You have a better route. I have a niece with venom in her blood, proposing to crawl through a reactor. Field 1, Captain. Do not hide behind protocol when it suits you. Tessa softened her voice. If Wayfinder fires on the refinery, Ven gets his war with Earth. If the mirror burns the forest, he erases a thinking species. This cable is the quiet option. Quiet options still kill people. Not this one. You don't know that. I know I'm the only person here who fits. Her aunt breathed once over the channel. 2 minutes. Then you come out even if the cable is intact. Agreed. It was not exactly a lie. Tessa intended to come out. Oren sealed her injured arm in a thermal sleeve and injected fluids. Varro fitted a cooling mask over her face. The vrakka watched every movement, restless at the smell of medication. She cannot follow you, Oren said. Tell her. I thought you were the animal expert. Tessa touched the female's snout. Stay. The vrakka pushed forward. Stay. The animal's claws dug into the deck, but she stopped. Tessa entered the conduit. Heat struck through the protective suit immediately. She crawled between pipes, following the optical cable's blue line. The space narrowed around a coolant junction. Warning lights in her mask climbed from yellow to red. Behind her, Varro called distances. Oren monitored her pulse. Captain Rook counted time without speaking the numbers aloud. The mirror array reached 5 minutes to focus. Tessa passed the first junction and found 3 identical blue cables. Which one? Oren checked the schematic, the central line. All 3 were central from her angle. She traced their markings. 1 carried ventilation. 1 linked medical systems. The 3rd had no label except a maintenance code obscured by heat damage. I need the installation archive. Accessing. Metal groaned. A coolant valve opened ahead, releasing a veil of white vapor. Tessa flattened herself against the conduit floor. Temperature warning screamed. You have 70 seconds, Captain Rook said. Oren found the archive. Command spine is cable 7 alpha. Tessa wiped condensation from the lines. 7 alpha was the lowest cable, pressed behind a pipe she could not reach. She removed the thermal glove from her good hand. Do not, Oren said. I need the grip. Your tissue will burn. She reached past the pipe. Pain flashed through her palm. Her fingers closed around the cable. It resisted, armored against sabotage. 40 seconds. Tessa pulled. The cable cut deeper into her hand without breaking. She thought of the vrakka hauling against the welded wheel with her, both of them bleeding. neither able to explain why cooperation should work. "Varro, cycle the optical load," she said. "That will energize the line. It will make the inner filament brittle. And shock you. The glove is off, I noticed." Varro obeyed. Light pulsed through the cable. Current snapped across Tessa's wet skin. Her arm locked. She screamed into the mask and pulled with everything left in her shoulder. The filament broke. Across the planet, the purification countdown vanished. The mirror array lost authorization and began returning to neutral alignment. Tessa released the dead cable. Her hand would not open. Steam filled the conduit. "Come back," Captain Rook said. Tessa tried. Her burned hand slipped. Her injured arm could not carry her weight. The conduit tilted in her vision, though she knew it had not moved. Then something slammed into the service hatch behind her. The vrakka had ignored the command to stay. She forced her head into the conduit, scales smoking against the hot metal. Her body could not fit farther, but her tusks reached Tessa's boots. One hooked gently around the thermal suit. The animal pulled. Tessa slid backward through steam and warning lights. Hands caught her at the hatch. Varro dragged her clear while Oren sprayed cooling gel across her burns. The vrakka stood over them, breathing hard. A strip of scale along her neck had blistered from the conduit heat. "Terrible stay," Tessa whispered. The animal touched her snout to the cooling mask. The forest was safe from the mirrors. Ven was not finished. He appeared on the geothermal chamber display with 2 armed guards and a restrained figure kneeling between them. Piri's evacuation pilot had been intercepted near the settlement. Piri herself knelt in the command center, wounded shoulder bound, Ven's claw around her throat fan. "Return specimen 12 and the archive," Ven said, "or the intern dies before the planetary assembly completes its first procedural vote." Piri looked at the camera. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "He still thinks she's a specimen," she said. Ven tightened his grip. The vrakka recognized Piri's voice. Her growl filled the chamber. Tessa rose on unsteady legs. "Now," she said, "we go upstairs." The geothermal workers chose sides before Tessa asked. 2 disabled the internal alarms and opened a maintenance stair. The third, who had called the vrakka only an animal, backed toward the emergency console. The female watched him. He considered her blistered scales, the burned human beside her, and the public channel still repeating Ven's files. He lowered his hand. "The east stair avoids security posts," he said. Varro took his access badge. "You are improving." They climbed through the institute while the planetary assembly argued over arrest authority. Ven had sealed the command level behind military bulkheads, but his control of the building was breaking. Researchers opened laboratory doors for Tessa. A maintenance crew disabled cameras. 2 security officers surrendered their weapons after Varro played the director's order to fire on Piri's transmitter. At every level, the vrakka female encountered the places where she had been dragged, shocked, or cut. In the surgical wing, she stopped before a room with a sloped restraint bed. Her claws scored the floor. Oren found records for 3 procedures performed without anesthesia, because Ven wanted unaltered gland responses. Tessa wanted to hurry her past. The animal refused. She entered the room, smelled the restraints, and struck the bed once. The metal frame folded. Then she walked out. It was not panic. It was not blind rage. She had returned to a place of pain, measured it, and chosen what deserved destruction. Oren transmitted the moment to the public archive. "Why record that?" Tessa asked. "Because I would once have labeled it random aggression. And now I prefer to admit when evidence humiliates me. You're becoming an excellent scientist." They reached the medical level. Oren insisted on treating Tessa's hand before the next climb. The palm had second-degree burns, and 2 fingers showed nerve damage. He sealed them in regenerative mesh, while Tessa watched the vrakka pace beyond the doorway. "Your aunt has requested your medical evacuation 7 times, he said. "Only 7. She became inventive after the 4th refusal. "Captain Rook entered the channel. "I can hear you." "Then you heard the doctor say, 'I'm receiving treatment.'" "I heard him avoid the words 'medically fit.'" Tessa flexed her bound fingers. Pain crawled to her wrist. "Piri is still upstairs. Wayfinder has reached orbit. We are deploying a rescue team. Ven will see them coming. He sees you coming too. He thinks I'm injured." "You are injured." "Exactly. He'll underestimate me accurately." Her aunt muttered something the translator declined to render. Oren finished the bandage. "I understand why humans domesticated predators. Other humans are exhausting." Tessa looked at the vrakka. "We didn't domesticate this one." The distinction mattered. Cooperation did not require ownership. They continued upward. Piri found a way to help from captivity. As Ven dragged her through the command center, she left spots of blue blood on each door frame. The trail appeared through maintenance cameras opened by sympathetic staff. It led not toward the main control room, but toward the Institute's broadcast studio. "He intends to make a statement," Varro said. "He intends to make Piri support it," Oren replied. The studio connected directly to planetary media. Ven could present the wounded intern as a rescued victim, blame her injury on the vrakka, and invoke emergency powers before contradictory evidence received formal verification. "He needs her alive until the camera turns on," Tessa said. The vrakka smelled Piri's blood at the command-level stair. Her pace changed. She moved ahead of the group, silent despite her size. Varro cut power to the bulkhead. Oren entered the manual override. The door opened 3 centimeters and stopped against a security brace. The female inserted 1 tusk into the gap. "Wait," Tessa said. "The last door shocked you." The animal pulled anyway. Electricity arced across her face. She roared but did not release. Varro wedged both hands into the opening. Tessa added her shoulder. Oren protested that his profession did not include door removal, then joined with all 4 arms. The brace tore loose. Security fire crossed the stairwell. Varro took the first pulse on his armor and drove forward. The vrakka stayed behind him until the guards changed targets, then climbed the wall and came over the ceiling. She landed between them, tusks sweeping rifles away from bodies. 1 guard fired point-blank into her chest. The scale absorbed most of the energy, but she staggered. Tessa struck the guard's wrist with a medical brace. His weapon fell. Varro pinned him against the wall. The second guard ran. The vrakka could have pursued. Instead, she turned toward the broadcast studio and followed Piri's blood. Ven's statement began. His face appeared on public screens across Soren. Piri stood beside him, hands bound, wounded shoulder carefully hidden from the camera. "Citizens," he said, "the Institute has suffered a coordinated attack by Terran operatives seeking control of our biomedical research. The creature beside the human released a compound that compromises judgment and produces protective fixation." Tessa watched from a service corridor outside the studio. "He made compassion a symptom," she said. Oren's throat fan darkened. "An effective lie. It allows every witness who changed their mind to be dismissed as infected." On screen, Ven displayed Tessa touching the vrakka after the bite. He slowed the image until her unsteady movement looked trance-like. He showed Varro firing on Institute aircraft, but removed the opening shots. He showed pack members attacking a suppression beacon without showing what the signal did to them. Then Piri spoke. "Director Ven saved my life," she said. The words were flat. Tessa knew Piri's throat fan well enough to see the terror beneath its forced blue color. Ven loosened his grip, satisfied. Piri lifted her head toward the camera. He saved it for the broadcast because a corpse cannot correct him. Her throat fan flashed a brilliant warning white. The vrakka protected me. Tessa protected me. Director Ven ordered the shot that wounded me. He is using a control device under the desk. Ven struck her. The public feed cut. The vrakka hit the studio door. It held, she struck again, hinges bent. Varro moved to breach, but Tessa saw a thin tube running from the frame into the ceiling. Gas trap. Oren scanned. Concentrated first secretion, aerosolized. Ven had turned the vrakka's venom into a room defense. A breach would flood the corridor with a compound designed to mutate in alien blood. Tessa's immune system carried the neutralizing instruction, but Varro and Oren would die. "Can you block the vents?" she asked. "Not before the door opens." "Then get behind the fire seal." Varro shook his head. "You cannot enter alone. The aerosol should be inactive in my blood." "Should?" Oren answered reluctantly. Her receptors recognized the compound after the bite. "In theory." "There is that comforting phrase again," Tessa said. The vrakka growled at the door. Tessa crouched beside her. "Piri is inside. You and me, they stay." Whether the animal understood the plan or only the name, she stopped striking until Varro and Oren withdrew behind the seal. Tessa activated the breach. The vrakka tore the door away. Black mist poured out. Tessa's skin prickled. Her eyes watered. The vrakka lowered her head beneath Tessa's torso, lifted her away from the densest cloud, and carried her into the studio. Ven stood behind the broadcast desk with a compact pulse weapon aimed at Piri. A control wand occupied his other hand. Two transparent tanks beside him held black venom and gold neutralizer. "Stop," he said. The vrakka did not. Ven activated the wand. Pain drove the animal to the floor. Her hidden spinal anchor flashed beneath the control wound. Tessa fell from her back and rolled behind a camera stand. "I knew the furnace signal was false," Ven said. "The implant's temperature remained too low." Piri kicked backward at his leg. He struck her with the weapon and kept the muzzle against her neck. "The human will survive the aerosol briefly," he continued. "Not the concentrated dose. Return the archive key and I will administer the neutralizer." "You don't understand your own research," Tessa said. "I paid experts to understand it. That's why you missed the choice." Ven fired at the floor near her. "The choice is simple." "Not mine, hers." The vrakka shook beneath the implant's current. Ven increased the signal. He expected pain to become rage, rage to become attack, and attack to prove his explanation. The animal turned toward Tessa. Her eyes clouded. Tessa stood in the venom mist with both hands visible. "You already decided once." The vrakka lunged. Ven's mandibles opened in triumph. At the last instant, the animal twisted. Her tail struck the broadcast desk, not Tessa. The control tanks toppled. Black and gold fluid spread together across the floor. The weapon fired. The shot burned a line along the vrakka's flank. Piri dropped and crawled away. Ven backed toward the emergency exit, activating the implant repeatedly. The animal continued toward him through each pulse. "Obey," he shouted. The word exposed everything. This had never been science to him. It was ownership with instruments. The vrakka trapped him against the wall. Her jaws opened around his narrow torso. Tessa could see the gland spines unfold behind the teeth. One set carried the black secretion, the other gold. The animal held the person who had tortured her, stolen her young, and ordered her species burned. Ven stopped breathing. The vrakka closed her mouth. Not on his body. On the control wand in his hand. Metal shattered between her teeth. She released it and stepped back. Tessa understood the message. even before Oren later translated the sequence of calls recorded in the room. The vrakka had not spared Ven because he deserved it. She had destroyed the thing that made him dangerous. Ven did not understand mercy when it stood over him. He pulled a blade from beneath his mantle and drove it into the animal's control wound. The vrakka screamed. Tessa hit Ven with the camera stand. The metal arm struck his wrist. The blade flew away. Piri, still bound, swept his legs with all three of hers. Ven fell into the mixed venom spreading across the floor. The liquid touched a cut on his face. Black veins moved beneath his pale skin. He stared at Tessa, neutralize her. The gold compound lay around him, but separated from the vrakka's living glands, it did nothing. Oren's research had shown why. The reversal required an active biological instruction matched to the first secretion. Only the vrakka could save him. The animal stood wounded, control stud sparking, and watched the director convulse. Tessa knelt beside her. You don't owe him anything. Ven clawed at the floor. Make it do it. That's the problem, Tessa said. No one can make her. The vrakka smelled Ven's blood. She approached. For one terrible moment, Tessa thought she would let him die. No court in the galaxy could have blamed an animal. Many people would have called it justice. The smaller gland spines unfolded. The vrakka bit Ven's shoulder once, delivered the gold secretion, and withdrew. His convulsions eased. He lay beneath the animal he had called mindless, alive only because she had chosen differently than he had. The fire seal opened. Varro entered in a sealed helmet and arrested him. Piri leaned against Tessa. Will anyone believe what happened? Tessa pointed to the studio cameras. The emergency backup light was still on. Everyone. The recording spread across Soren before Ven reached medical detention. It crossed the sector within an hour. Alien scientists watched the deadliest known predator bite a human twice and refused to kill the person who had tortured it. Commentators called the survival impossible. Biologists argued about chemical pathways. Politicians argued about legal personhood. The vrakka did not wait for their conclusions. She collapsed beside the broken control wand. Oren scanned the spinal wound. The blade had driven the implant deeper. Barbs pressed against the nerve sheath. If it shifted another millimeter, her hind limbs would fail. Leaving it in place meant any remaining transmitter could reactivate the pain. We need surgery, he said. Tessa sank beside the animal, then operate. Oren looked toward the ruined surgical wing. Ven destroyed the specialized equipment before we arrived. Captain Rook's voice entered the room. Wayfinder has a trauma theater and human veterinary unit. Shuttle is docking now. Can your unit treat alien spinal anatomy? Oren asked. No, the captain said. Can you? Not alone. Then it sounds as though first contact between our medical departments is about to become practical. The vrakka's amber eyes found Tessa. Her claws pressed, released, and pressed again against the floor, counting the fading pulses inside her spine. Tessa rested her bandaged hand over the wound without touching the stud. You're coming with us, she said. Moving the vrakka from the Institute to Wayfinder required more diplomacy than arresting its director. Planetary quarantine officers arrived first. They surrounded the broadcast studio with portable barriers and demanded the animal be sealed in a pressure crate. Terran rescue medics arrived 30 seconds later and refused to load a spinal casualty into a container without stabilization. Soren wildlife officials appeared after both groups and claimed jurisdiction over a native protected species they had not considered protected that morning. The vrakka settled the argument by growling whenever anyone brought the crate closer. Tessa sat beside her on the studio floor while Oren negotiated. The venom aerosol had left Tessa feverish, though her altered receptors continued dismantling it. Every breath tasted metallic. Her burned hand throbbed beneath regenerative mesh. She wanted to close her eyes, but the vrakka's counting claws became faster whenever Tessa's attention drifted. "No crate," she said. The quarantine chief clicked his jaw plates. "The animal weighs more than our shuttle restraint rating." "Then remove the restraints and distribute her weight across the deck." "It is conscious." "That's why I recommend asking rather than dropping a box on her." The chief looked at the bite wounds in Tessa's sleeve. "Your judgment is medically disputed." "By whom?" "Director Ven's report." Varro stepped into view with Ven restrained behind him. "His judgment is under arrest." The quarantine chief reconsidered. Wayfinder's landing shuttle lowered its cargo ramp to street level. Instead of restraints, the medics laid a path of insulated mats. Oren administered a local nerve block around the control stud, but he left the vrakka fully awake. Tessa walked ahead, slow enough for the animal to choose each step. Thousands of citizens watched from evacuation shelters and rooftops. Some had spent their lives hearing that vrakka hunted settlements for pleasure. Parents held children behind them. Security officers kept hands near weapons. The female smelled the crowd and stopped. Tessa felt the tension travel through the animal's neck. Her juvenile was far away in the den. The institute towered behind her. A human shuttle waited ahead. Every direction held strangers. Piri emerged from an ambulance despite medical orders. She wore a support sling and leaned on Lieutenant Hesk, but she raised her uninjured arm. "You carried me out," she called to the vrakka. "This one carries you." The animal recognized her voice. Her dorsal scales lowered. She crossed the street and entered the shuttle. Only then did the crowd breathe. Wayfinder was not a warship. The Terran vessel served as a mobile ecological hospital, with seed vaults, field laboratories, rescue bays, and habitats adaptable to wounded life from hundreds of worlds. Its hull carried scars from storms and claws rather than weapons. When the shuttle docked, technicians converted the largest trauma theater while Oren reviewed vrakka anatomy beside a human surgeon named Dr. June Malik. June was 30, compact, and unable to remain still while thinking. She circled the projection of the animal's spine until everyone else became dizzy. "The barbs are sitting inside 3 nerve bundles," she said. "Pulling is impossible. Cutting from above risks the motor tract." Oren expanded the image. "We can dissolve the barbs if we identify the alloy." "Do we have time?" "The implant is migrating with every muscle contraction. 4 hours before permanent injury, perhaps less." Tessa leaned against the medical table. "Use my blood." Both doctors turned toward her. "Explain," June said. "The neutralizer taught my immune cells to take apart the black secretion. Maybe it can identify material the vrakka considers foreign." Oren's throat fan shifted with interest. "The secretion contains programmable carrier proteins. If we attach an allo-binding catalyst—" "No," June interrupted. "Her blood is already handling an alien toxin and aerosol exposure. We are not converting her into surgical solvent." "I meant synthesize the receptor pattern," Oren said. "Then say that before she volunteers an artery." Tessa liked her immediately. The vrakka lay on reinforced flooring beyond a transparent partition. She refused sedation whenever Tessa left the room. Each injection made her heart rate climb until the human returned. The doctors finally allowed Tessa to scrub in and sit near the animal's head. "We need her still," June said. "Can she understand?" "She understands consequence." "That isn't the same as explaining surgery." "It might be more important." Tessa showed the vrakka the implant image. She touched the burned shoulder, then the surgical tool, then pointed to the broken control wand on an evidence tray. The animal smelled each object. When Oren approached with the sedative, she exposed her teeth. Tessa placed her own uninjured wrist beneath the injector and let Orin administer a harmless saline dose. The vrakka watched. Then she lowered her head. The sedative entered slowly. Her claws continued counting until the muscles relaxed. Surgery began. Wayfinder received an unidentified transmission 11 minutes later. The signal bypassed civilian channels and entered through the evidence archive connection Peary had used. A red symbol appeared across the operating theater displays, a split circle surrounding a black fang. Orin recognized it. Aegis Combine. The name belonged to a defense consortium dissolved after the last sector war. Its companies had supplied adaptive weapons to both sides. Ven's hidden funding trail had ended inside anonymous trusts because those trusts were not investments. They were the remnants of Aegis. A voice spoke without an image. Terran vessel, you possess proprietary biological material stolen from an authorized research partner. Transfer specimen 12, all secretion samples, and the human test subject. Failure will constitute theft of strategic assets. June did not look up from the exposed control stud. I'm the human test subject's doctor. My answer has too many syllables for polite translation. Captain Rook transmitted a calmer refusal. The unknown sender replied by activating the implant. The vrakka convulsed on the surgical table. Her spine arched. One barb shifted toward the motor tract. Orin cut power to every receiver in the theater, but the control stud continued pulsing from stored commands. It contains an autonomous punishment cycle, he said. Ven's wand was not the only trigger. June held the exposed nerve bundle with microforceps. Stop the movement or she loses her legs. Tessa leaned over the vrakka's head. The animal's eyes opened beneath sedation, unfocused and terrified. I'm here, Tessa said. The claws struck the table. 1, 2, 3. The pulse repeated every 19 seconds. Tessa remembered the first restraint chamber. The animal had counted, because predictability was the only control left to her. Tell us when, Tessa said. The vrakka's claw pressed down. June and Orin watched the monitor. The next pulse built inside the implant. The claw lifted. It struck the table 1 second before the discharge. Now, Tessa said. June cut the first barb during the tiny interval after the pulse. Orin injected the synthesized receptor catalyst. Metal around the second barb began dissolving. The vrakka counted again. They worked to her rhythm. She could not stop the pain, but she could make it predictable for the people trying to free her. After 6 cycles, June removed the main transmitter. After 10, Orin flushed the last metal fragment from the nerve sheath. The motor signals stabilized. The vrakka stopped counting. Tessa realized she was crying only when a tear fell onto the animal's scales. Surgery complete, June said. She keeps all 6 legs. Relief lasted 3 seconds. Wayfinder's collision alarm sounded. An unregistered ship emerged from fold space beside Sauron's outer moon. It was narrow, black, and built around a single spinal weapon. Aegis markings appeared only after its arrival, as if the consortium no longer cared who saw them. Terran vessel, the same voice said, you were offered a legal transfer. Captain Rook moved Wayfinder behind the orbital refinery for cover. The ecological hospital possessed defensive fields and rescue drones, not capital weapons. Planetary patrol craft scrambled, but half still operated under codes Ven had compromised. The Aegis ship fired no beam. It transmitted a control pulse across the planet. The removed implant sparked on the evidence tray. Every recovered behavior anchor in the Institute activated. In the black glass forest, thousands of vrakka cries rose at once. Orin checked ground monitors. The signal is not limited to implanted animals. It uses the anchors as relays to amplify the suppression frequency. Pack members began attacking anything near them, including one another. The wave moved toward the southern settlement. Ven had built the beacons for a local demonstration. Aegis had always intended a planetary weapon. The consortium voice returned. Transfer the proprietary specimens and the pulse ends. They aren't specimens, Tessa said. Your moral designation is irrelevant. The vrakka female opened her eyes. The surgical field still covered her back. Sedative slowed her breathing. Yet the distant pack signal reached her through Wayfinder's hull. Her claws scraped the table. Tessa's wound turned cold. The temporary receptors in her blood responded to the planet-wide distress call. Can we transmit the neutralizing pattern? She asked. Orin understood at once. The second secretion cancels an individual threat mark. It does not suppress an external frequency. But the pack accepted my mark because she changed it. They used the same calls to identify one another. June looked from Tessa's blood monitor to the vrakka. You want to broadcast her choice. I want every animal hearing Aegis pain to hear something stronger. Orin built a model. The gold secretion changed receptor activity when exposed to the female's infrasonic call. If Wayfinder sampled that call, modulated it through Tessa's blood response, and transmitted it through the planetary anchor network, they might interrupt the rage association. Or amplify it, he said. Then we test small. There was no small test. The pack was already approaching the settlement. Planetary security requested orbital fire authorization. The rescued female tried to stand. June blocked her. Her spine is open. Tessa held the animal's head. You don't have to move, you have to answer them. The vrakka released a weak vibration. It faded beneath the medical equipment. Again, Tessa said. The animal's eyes closed. Her chest expanded. The second call shook instruments on the table. Wayfinder recorded it. Orin linked the waveform to Tessa's immune response. The pattern formed a complex sequence, not an order, but recognition followed by a cancellation signal. Ready, he said. Captain Rook opened the planetary network. The Aegis ship jammed it. They know what we're doing, the captain said. We need direct access to an anchor relay. The largest relay remained inside the Soren Institute broadcast tower. Aegis had locked it remotely, but Piri still possessed the maintenance path she used during the archive upload. Tessa called her. Piri answered from a settlement clinic, pale but conscious. You need me to break into the Institute again. From a hospital bed. That seems less dangerous than last time. Your doctor may disagree. My doctor is currently repeating human-elephant facts to keep me awake. She will welcome the silence. Piri connected through the drone's old access key. Aegis countered. Code moved between the clinic, Wayfinder, and the Institute while the pack crossed the final ridge above the settlement. On ground feeds, families entered shelters. Security lines formed. The first vrakka appeared among the trees, scales raised, bodies jerking with every transmitted pulse. Relay open, Piri said. Wayfinder sent the female's call. The sound traveled through suppression beacons, control studs, public receivers, and the roots of the black glass forest. The pack stopped. Not all at once. One animal struck a security barrier. Another collapsed. A third turned on the nearest vrakka, then froze with its tusks against the other's neck. The female on Wayfinder called again. Tessa placed her bitten arm against the animal's chest. The receptors in her blood warmed. Thousands of vrakka lowered their scales. The first animals backed away from the settlement. Then the Aegis ship increased power. The relay tower overloaded. Piri cried out as her terminal exploded. Wayfinder lost the channel. The pack screamed and surged forward again. The consortium vessel began charging its spinal weapon. Captain Rook studied the tactical display. They're not targeting us. The weapon aligned with the forest. If Aegis could not recover the species, it would destroy the evidence. Tessa looked at the sedated vrakka, the surgical wound, and the alien ship beyond the moon. Can Wayfinder get between the shot and the planet? Her aunt's answer was immediate, yes. Will the shields hold? This answer took longer. Once, Wayfinder moved before Tessa could say more. The hospital ship left the refinery's shadow and descended toward the line between Aegis and Soren. Its broad rescue hull looked fragile against the consortium vessel's spinal weapon. Seed vaults, medical bays, and habitats for 2,000 displaced animals lay behind one defensive field. Captain Rook ordered every non-essential section evacuated toward the central spine. June locked the vrakka's surgical platform to the deck. This is why trauma hospitals should not become shields. Today it's both, Tessa said. She watched the tactical display. The Aegis weapon needed 90 seconds to charge. Wayfinder could absorb the first strike, but a second would break the ship before planetary patrols reached firing range. The refinery mirror array had returned to neutral. Its communication lasers remained operational. We don't need the Institute relay, Tessa said. Use the mirrors. Oren looked up. They transmit power not infrasound. The anchors convert radio commands into suppression pulses. Send the recognition waveform as data. Let every public receiver repeat it. Aegis will jam the signal again. Not if the refinery paints every square kilometer with separate beams. They can block a channel. Can they block 10,000? Captain Rook heard the proposal. Refinery control lost its emergency authorization when you cut the cable. The governor can issue a new one. The assembly is still voting on whether the vrakka qualify as protected cognition. Tell them the vrakka don't have time for the paperwork that proves they deserve time. The governor joined the channel. He was an elderly celery whose public image had spent the morning behind layers of caution. Now his throat fan burned orange. I can authorize the mirrors for civilian rescue, he said. I cannot surrender planetary infrastructure to a foreign vessel. Then don't, Tessa replied. Give control to your own technicians. Oren provides the pattern, Piri provides the access route. Wayfinder only carries the animal making the call. The governor studied her. You trust Institute staff after what occurred? Oren answered. An institution is not the person who corrupted it. If we abandon every instrument Ven touched, we grant him ownership of our future. The governor issued authorization. Refinery workers aligned 400 mirrors toward the atmosphere. Weather stations, mining towers, agricultural satellites, and civilian comm buoys accepted the waveform. Piri rebuilt her connection through a clinic sterilizer that happened to contain a short-range radio. Across Soren, ordinary systems became pieces of one enormous transmitter. The vrakka female needed to call again. Sedation had pulled her deeper. The surgical monitors showed stable but weak respiration. June would not administer a stimulant, while the spinal sheath remained inflamed. If we wake her violently, the injury could swell, she said. Then don't wake her violently, Tessa replied. She lay down beside the animal on the reinforced deck. Wayfinder rolled around them as it took position. Tools rattled in their locks. Tessa ignored the weapon countdown and listened to the vrakka breathe. Your young is safe, she said. The pack heard you. They need to know you're still here. No response. Tessa removed the thermal sleeve from her bitten arm. The wounds had begun closing, black and gold traces beneath the skin. She pressed them gently against the vrakka's lower jaw. The temporary receptors warmed. The animal inhaled. That's it. Amber eyes opened. The Aegis weapon reached full charge. Wayfinder's shields rose. The consortium ship fired. White energy crossed the space between moon and planet. Wayfinder entered its path. The rescue vessel vanished inside light. Tessa felt the deck rise, twist, and strike her back. Medical systems went dark. A pressure wall collapsed in the next bay. The defensive field held. Barely. Wayfinder emerged with half its outer armor burning. One habitat ring had lost atmosphere. Rescue teams moved before damage reports finished arriving. The vrakka tried to stand. June held the surgical platform. Keep her down. Tessa did not force the animal. She supported the heavy head and let her lift only her chest. The female called. Orin captured the waveform. Refinery mirrors flashed in sequence. The call became light, radio, vibration, and data. It descended through clouds, entered towers, passed into buried anchors, and shook the roots of the black glass forest. The pack at the settlement stopped again. This time the recognition pattern came from every direction. Aegis jammed one beam, then 10, then 100. Thousands remained. Vrakka calls answered from valley after valley. The planetary network mapped them. 12,000 adults, nurseries beneath the western ridge, family groups around geothermal springs, old animals remaining near burial chambers. The species Venn described as solitary killers revealed a connected population whose calls crossed an entire continent. They were not merely abandoning the attack. They were coordinating a retreat that kept juveniles in the center and injured animals away from security lines. The world watched intelligence become impossible to deny. Aegis charged a second shot. Wayfinder's shield capacity stood at 9%. Planetary patrol vessels approached but could not reach weapon range in time. The refinery mirrors could transmit the vrakka call, not stop a capital cannon. Tessa studied the data flowing through the network. Every anchor relay still answered the consortium ship. Each one carried its identification address back toward Aegis. Can we make their weapon hear all the anchors at once? Orin followed her reasoning. Reflect the control handshake through the mirrors. Overload their command receiver. The anchors use low energy. 12,000 low-energy answers focused through a solar refinery. Captain Rook joined them from a damaged bridge. Blood marked one side of her face. If we reflect solar power along the handshake, we turn civilian mirrors into a weapon. A receiver burn, not a hull strike, Tessa said. Enough to stop the cannon. And if the reflection crosses their reactor controls, then we warn them first. Her aunt gave a grim smile. Of course we do. Wayfinder transmitted openly. Aegis vessel, your control network has been isolated. Power down the spinal weapon and accept planetary custody. Continued charging will cause us to disable the receiver. The answer came from the anonymous voice. Animals do not possess assets. You are obstructing lawful recovery. No government here recognizes your claim. Governments change. Strategic value remains. The second weapon charge passed 60%. Captain Rook looked at Tessa. You heard them. So did the planet. Orin loaded the reflection pattern. Peary sent the final route through the clinic network. Refinery crews aligned the mirrors. Tessa kept the vrakka's call running beneath the control code so the pack would not feel the returning power as another pain command. At 80% charge, Aegis attempted to disconnect its receiver. The anchors completed the handshake first. Sunlight leaped from the refinery. It did not form one beam. It formed a mesh of narrow gold lines, each carrying a fragment of power back along the consortium's own control network. The Aegis ship's antennas glowed. External transmitters melted. The spinal weapon lost alignment. Its cannon discharged sideways. The beam missed Soren and cut through empty space. Planetary patrols arrived. Wayfinder launched rescue drones around the disabled vessel instead of torpedoes. Aegis ship, Captain Rook said. Your reactor cooling is failing because you routed it through an illegal control receiver. We are sending repair craft. Disarm and they will help. Fire on them and your crew will be explaining a preventable death while it happens." For the first time, the anonymous voice sounded uncertain. "You disabled us." "Yes." "Then you offer assistance." "Also yes, try to keep up." Weapons slid back into the black hull. The Aegis crew surrendered. On Soren, the vrakka pack reached the forest and disappeared beneath the chiming leaves. Security officers lowered their rifles. Families left shelters. The last suppression beacon shut down. The rescued female's call weakened. Tessa felt the animal's weight settle against her. Monitors showed inflammation building around the surgery site from the strain. June administered treatment while Oren checked motor response. "She needs rest," June said. "She'll get it." "So do you." Tessa tried to stand and discovered that the deck was less interested in cooperation than the vrakka had been. June caught her before she fell. That was not a suggestion. Medical staff placed Tessa on a stretcher beside the animal's platform. As they moved toward the recovery habitat, workers cheered through open hatches. Tessa found the reaction embarrassing. The vrakka ignored it completely. Captain Rook met them outside the habitat ring. Her forehead had been sealed with silver medical film. She looked first at Tessa's burns, then the bite wounds, then the alien predator occupying most of the corridor. "You promised to come out of the conduit," she said. "I did. Attached to a tusk." "Details." Her aunt's professional expression broke. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to Tessa's for one quiet second. "Never do that again." "Which part?" "Any part after breakfast." The vrakka smelled Captain Rook and rumbled. "Is that approval?" the captain asked. Oren checked his scanner. "Unknown." Tessa closed her eyes. "She's judging your threat status." "And?" The animal's scales remained flat. "You passed." Recovery took 9 days. Wayfinder converted a habitat bay into a piece of Soren forest. Black glass saplings grew beneath adjustable light. A shallow mineral pool reflected the stars through a transparent ceiling. The vrakka refused the enclosed sleeping area and rested beneath the largest tree where she could see every entrance. Tessa occupied a medical bed behind a low barrier. June claimed the arrangement allowed simultaneous monitoring. Tessa suspected the vrakka simply became agitated whenever staff moved her human out of sight. The juvenile arrived on the 3rd day. Soren wildlife officers brought it aboard with no crate. The small vrakka entered the habitat, saw its mother, and crossed the entire bay in a blur of claws. The female tried to rise, failed, and lowered her head as the juvenile climbed over her face. Tessa watched from her bed. The sight hurt in a good way. Piri visited through a telepresence unit. Her projected throat fan flashed excited colors as she delivered news. Director Venn had been transferred from medical detention to a planetary court. The Aegis crew had surrendered funding records. 11 institute administrators were cooperating with investigators. The Assembly suspended all mineral claims in the Western Range. "They are debating whether the vrakka should receive legal personhood," Piri said. The female groomed her juvenile and showed no interest in the debate. "Ask whether personhood is required to protect a home," Tessa replied. "Some delegates say intelligence must be proven first." "We proved communication, planning, burial behavior, restraint, medicine, and mercy. What standard are they using?" Piri hesitated. "The standard that keeps existing laws comfortable." Oren entered the habitat carrying 12 cases of Institute records. "Then the standard requires discomfort." He had resigned his administrative post, but remained lead biologist during the inquiry. His first public statement acknowledged every vrakka behavior he had dismissed, and every procedure he had accepted without asking enough questions. "The tribunal begins tomorrow," he said. "They have requested Tessa's testimony." June folded her arms. Tessa's blood counts request another 48 hours in bed. "Can the bed attend?" Tessa asked. "The bed has better judgment." The tribunal agreed to remote testimony. What no one expected was the vrakka's participation. Oren had spent days comparing their calls with context. The species did not use symbolic language like humans or celery. Their communication layered identity, emotional state, location, remembered danger, and intended movement. A call could not say Director Ven installed a control stud on this date. It could say the one carrying a particular chemical trace brought pain, removed a young, and returned through the remembered path. The rescued female could identify Ven. More importantly, she could identify other Aegis handlers in the funding archive by the scent samples preserved in capture equipment. The tribunal permitted a controlled demonstration. Officials entered Wayfinder's habitat one at a time. The female ignored most. When Ven appeared behind armored glass, her scales rose, but she did not charge. She walked to the broken control wand on the evidence table and crushed it again. Oren translated the call that followed as closely as his science allowed. "Painmaker, young taker, command broken." Ven's attorney objected that the interpretation was subjective. The juvenile vrakka carried a piece of the crushed wand to the burial arrangement. The female had begun beneath the habitat tree. It placed the metal beside a stone, representing one of the adults lost in the laboratory. No translation was needed. The tribunal admitted the behavior as corroborating evidence rather than direct testimony. It was a cautious decision, but it opened a door no planetary court had opened before. Ven watched that door close on his freedom. The trial lasted 7 weeks. Tessa expected the most difficult question to concern the bite. Instead, a tribunal delegate asked who owned the neutralizing compound once it had circulated through human blood. An Aegis attorney argued that Ven's laboratory had documented both secretions, making the gold response a derivative discovery. The consortium claimed licensing rights to any antivenom developed from Tessa's altered immune cells. Their language transformed the vrakka's choice into raw material and Tessa's survival into a commercial event. Tessa listened from Wayfinder's habitat with her bandaged hand resting on the low barrier. The female vrakka slept beneath the glass tree. Her juvenile chased silent blue insects through the branches. "You did not discover the neutralizer," Tessa told the tribunal. "She used it before your institute knew it existed. You separated 2 compounds and decided the first was useful because it killed. She showed you the second because she changed her decision." The attorney opened his mandibles. "An animal cannot hold intellectual property." "Then perhaps your property laws are too small for your discoveries." "The Institute funded the research." "The Institute funded torture." Emotional terms do not resolve ownership. Neither does pretending the only mind in the room belongs to whoever filed the patent. The attorney requested access to Tessa's blood under evidence rules. He wanted enough to reproduce the receptor change. June objected on medical grounds. Captain Rook objected on diplomatic grounds. Tessa objected because no one had asked the vrakka. The tribunal chair seemed genuinely confused. How would we obtain consent from a non-symbolic communicator? Oren displayed a simple experiment. He placed 2 sealed sample tools near the female. One contained a harmless collection pad. The other contained the scent of institute restraints. The vrakka crushed the restraint-scented device and pushed the harmless tool away without damaging it. "That is refusal," he said. "Or object aversion," the Aegis attorney replied. Oren replaced the tool with a food sample. The female accepted it. Then he offered a medical scanner she had seen during surgery. She permitted him to pass it over her spine. When he presented the collection pad again, she moved between it and Tessa. "That is a consistent boundary across changing objects," Oren said. "If your law cannot recognize yes unless it arrives in your grammar, your law recognizes obedience, not consent." The tribunal denied the blood seizure. It placed the neutralizing research under a public trust governed by Soren scientists, Terran physicians, wildlife representatives, and an independent ethics board. No sample could be taken from a vrakka without voluntary participation demonstrated through repeated choice. Medical antivenom would be provided at cost, never sold as a weapon license. The decision did more than protect one compound. It became the first sector ruling to recognize behavioral consent from a nonverbal intelligent species. Aegis shares collapsed before the tribunal adjourned. Venn was convicted of unlawful experimentation, attempted species destruction, falsification of safety evidence, kidnapping, and conspiracy with a prohibited weapons organization. The court did not charge him for Tessa's bite. The recording showed clearly that his stimulant order caused the breach, but the vrakka's first bite had not been an execution. It had been a threat mark delivered, while she protected a trapped juvenile-sized person from armed strangers. Tessa asked the prosecutor not to rewrite the animal's choice into human legal categories that did not fit. "She bit me," Tessa said. "She also came back. Both facts matter." Venn received 42 years in a rehabilitation colony and a lifetime ban from biological research. Some citizens wanted permanent isolation. Others wanted a harsher sentence. The vrakka did not attend sentencing. She was learning to run again. Her recovery began with one step. June removed the final spinal dressing inside Wayfinder's habitat. Oren checked motor signals. Tessa opened the low medical barrier and walked 3 meters away. The female lifted her hindquarters, swayed, and set all 6 feet beneath her. The juvenile bounded around her, entirely unhelpful. She took one careful step, then another. Tessa resisted the urge to approach. Rescue training taught that assistance could become pressure when offered too quickly. The animal needed to own the movement. At the 5th step, one hind leg folded. She caught herself, rested, and continued. At the 10th, she crossed the distance and pressed her head into Tessa's chest hard enough to knock her backward onto the grass mat. The juvenile climbed onto both of them. June laughed until she cried. Oren claimed the scanner required his full attention, though his throat fan glowed bright gold. Tessa's immune receptors began fading the following week. The warmth around her bite wounds weakened whenever the vrakka called. Oren had predicted the change. Human immune systems removed temporary structures once the foreign instruction disappeared. Within a month, Tessa would no longer feel the pack's recognition in her blood. She had not realized how much she relied on it until it began to leave. One evening she sat beneath the habitat tree while the female watched stars through the ceiling. Tessa touched the 2 closing punctures on her arm. "Soon I won't have your answer inside me," she said. The vrakka clicked softly. "Maybe that's better. Chemical certainty is a shortcut. The rest of us have to learn trust the slow way." The animal lowered her head into Tessa's lap. Trust did not need certainty. It needed the freedom to leave. The release date was set for the first clear morning after Wayfinder completed repairs. Planetary officials wanted a ceremony. Media networks requested a landing platform, speeches, and close-range cameras. Tessa rejected all of it. The female had already endured one public demonstration. They chose a quiet clearing near the western den. Only Tessa, Oren, Peary, June, Varro, and Captain Rook traveled with the transport. The juvenile rode beside its mother in an open cargo bay, peering at the forest as soon as the doors unsealed. Black glass leaves chimed in the morning wind. The female stepped onto native soil. She stopped after one pace and smelled the clearing. Her healed hind legs trembled, not from fear but effort. The juvenile ran ahead, returned, and ran ahead again. Calls moved beneath the trees. Pack members emerged from every direction. Adults approached slowly, reading the hospital scents, surgical marks, and human traces on the returned animals. The rescued female answered with her double pulse and 3 clicks. The valley replied. Tessa's fading receptors warmed one final time. The female walked toward the pack, then looked back. Tessa remained by the transport. She wanted to cross the clearing, hold the animal's neck, and pretend departure was another emergency she could solve. Instead, she kept her hands at her sides. "Your choice," she said. The vrakka returned. She touched one tusk to the bite scars, breathed against Tessa's palm, and delivered a low call too soft for the others to record clearly. Then she turned and entered the forest with her young. The pack closed around them. Dark bodies disappeared between chiming trees. Tessa's receptors cooled. Piri stood beside her, shoulders still supported by a flexible brace. "Are you sad?" "Yes." "Did the release fail?" "No, that's why I'm sad." Piri considered that. Humans have complicated success responses. "You should see us at weddings." Oren placed a recording marker at the edge of the clearing, not inside vrakka territory. It would receive calls without transmitting unless the pack approached it. The new research protocol began with distance. The former Soren Institute reopened 6 months later under another name, the Soren Center for Chosen Contact. Its first rule prohibited demonstrations designed to provoke behavior. Its second required every research plan to identify how a subject could refuse. Its third gave junior staff a protected channel for reporting hidden procedures. Piri had written that one. The restraint theater became a public archive. Workers removed the chamber and kept the cracked floor visible. The hidden sublevel became a rehabilitation clinic for animals carrying behavior anchors. Oren insisted that his own early reports remain on display beside corrections. "Why preserve your mistakes?" a visiting delegate asked him. "Because erasing them would allow future scientists to believe they are incapable of the same ones." Tessa joined the center as field director only after negotiating a clause that let her spend more time outside it than inside. She trained mixed-species rescue teams in the forest. Varro led a new wildlife security unit whose officers learned de-escalation before weapons qualification. June returned to Earth but visited whenever a surgery became medically interesting, which usually meant dangerous. Piri became the youngest research lead in Soren history. Her first study asked whether vrakka burial arrangements changed across family groups. She spent 3 months observing from a ridge and collected no physical samples. Senior academics complained that the work was slow. "The subjects have waited 80 years for us to become patient," she told them. "We can spare a season." The vrakka did not become harmless. 2 field workers ignored perimeter calls during the first year and were chased into a river. A mineral surveyor approached a nursery after being warned away and lost an equipment pack to a single bite. Tessa refused every media request to describe the species as gentle. "Respect is not the belief that someone cannot hurt you," she said. "It's understanding that their power does not erase their reasons." No unprovoked vrakka death occurred after the suppression beacons were removed. The 9 deaths in Ven's original file received a new investigation. 7 victims had carried control equipment. 1 had entered a nursery den. The 9th, a young maintenance worker, had tried to disable an early beacon and been caught between security fire and a panicked animal. The Institute had blamed the vrakka to hide why he was there. His family finally learned that he had attempted a rescue. The center placed his name in the public archive. The discovery that tested the new rules came during the winter rains. A maintenance team clearing an abandoned prismium shaft found a sealed Aegis cache. The workers followed safety procedure. They marked the chamber, withdrew, and called the center. Before Tessa's unit arrived, groundwater reached a cracked container inside. The cache did not hold weapons in any familiar shape. It held cultured black secretion stabilized in microscopic capsules. The water carried those capsules beneath the southern settlement. 6 people collapsed before sensors identified the contamination. By nightfall, 43 patients filled the settlement clinic. Their symptoms differed by species because the vrakka toxin changed after entering each bloodstream. Celery lost control of their throat muscles. Rhone developed seizures. Avar patients suffered nerve failure in the limbs. 2 human miners experienced fever and temporary blindness. The Public Antivenom Trust had produced laboratory neutralizers, but each batch worked against only one stabilized form. Aegis had mixed dozens. Oren stood over the clinic's molecular display while rain struck the roof. The cultured gold secretion cannot adapt after delivery. The living gland responds to the marked blood in real time. Tessa knew what he was saying before he finished. You need a vrakka. I need cooperation from one. The distinction came from the tribunal ruling. It did not make the problem easier. No one proposed capturing an animal. The governor made that clear before fear could become policy. Instead, Tessa carried blood samples to the western boundary and activated the passive recording marker. She sent the pack a distress pattern Oren had developed from observed calls. Known danger, living injured, approach optional. Then she waited in the rain. The settlement clinic sent updates through her earpiece. 51 patients, 3 critical. 1 was Lieutenant Hesk, the pilot who had helped carry Piri from the ravine. Another was a celery child whose family had watched the vrakka pack stop outside their shelter during the Aegis pulse. Piri waited beside Tessa with a case of sealed samples. What if they do not come? Then we keep working on the synthetic version. It may take days. Optional has to mean optional even when no hurts. The rain deepened. Calls moved far inside the forest but none approached. After 4 hours, the clinic reported the first death. Tessa closed her eyes. The victim was an elderly refinery worker. She had helped redirect the mirrors during the Aegis attack. Piri's throat fan darkened almost black. We could go to the den. That would turn a request into pressure. People are dying. I know. How do humans endure waiting when action might help? Badly. Tessa wanted to run into the trees. Rescue training filled her body with commands. Move, reach, carry, fix. The hardest discipline was recognizing when action served the rescuer's panic more than the person or animal being approached. At midnight, something moved beyond the recording marker. The adult female entered the clearing. She was alone. Rain shone on her scales. The old surgical scar reflected the marker's blue light. She smelled Tessa, then the case in Piri's hands. Tessa opened it and stepped back. The vrakka examined each sealed blood sample. Her gland spines unfolded and retracted as she processed the chemical traces. She touched the critical child's vial with one tusk, then released a call toward the forest. 5 vrakka answered. They arrived carrying pieces of a pale root in their mouths. Oren had observed the animals chewing those roots after exposure to suppression beacons, but had assumed they treated pain. The female crushed one against the child's sample. Compounds in the root activated her gold glands. They have their own medicine, Piri whispered. The female produced a drop of neutralizer onto a collection surface Oren had designed. No restraint, no needle. The animal could move away at any moment. Each arriving vrakka responded to a different blood sample. Their secretions varied with the altered toxins. Tessa transmitted the results to the clinic. Oren and June synthesized emergency doses from the donated patterns. Within an hour, the critical child's breathing stabilized. Hesk regained movement before dawn. The remaining patients improved through the morning. The vrakka stayed until the last sealed sample no longer carried an active mark. Then they left. The center recorded the event as a medical collaboration, not a harvest. The wording angered pharmaceutical companies that wanted predictable supply. It also attracted physicians who understood that unpredictability sometimes came from asking rather than taking. Researchers studied the pale root with samples gathered outside den territory. It did not create antivenom by itself. It allowed the vrakka's second glands to adjust more quickly. The pack had combined plant knowledge, chemical communication, and voluntary care long before alien scientists named any of those fields. The antivenom trust changed its structure again. It added protected root habitats and funded non-invasive observation led by Peary. The settlement built filtration systems around abandoned mines. Aegis cache maps recovered from the surrendered vessel guided cleanup teams to 8 more sites. No one described the winter deaths as the price of discovery. Tessa hated that phrase. The refinery worker had not died to teach them. She had died because Aegis stored adaptive poison beneath a watershed. At the memorial, the worker's daughter placed a black glass leaf beside her name and thanked the vrakka who came. The pack remained in the trees. Their absence from the ceremony did not make their help less real. The crisis also changed the human public response. At first, Terran networks had celebrated Tessa's survival as evidence of human toughness. Commentators invented stories about deathworld immune systems defeating alien venom. Some claimed the first bite had failed because human blood was uniquely powerful. Tessa appeared on one broadcast to correct them. "I survived because the vrakka returned," she said. Human biology gave the second secretion something it could instruct, but calling that a human victory erases the mind that made the choice. The impossible event wasn't that a human resisted poison. It was that everyone watching expected the predator to be incapable of mercy. The clip spread farther than the original bite footage. Human schools used it in ethics lessons. Wildlife teams revised first contact training. A few politicians complained that Tessa diminished humanity by sharing credit with an animal. Captain Rook invited those politicians to explain their position inside a vrakka den. None accepted. Tessa's relationship with the Western pack became less dramatic and more honest. Weeks sometimes passed without a sighting. Recording markers captured calls that Oren and Peary could not interpret. Field teams made mistakes, withdrew, and tried again. A young vrakka stole Varro's equipment case and buried it among a row of smooth stones. He recovered the tools but left the case where the animal had placed it. "Why?" a trainee asked. "Because it clearly has a filing system," Varro replied. The center's most important finding was not a spectacular proof of intelligence. It was the accumulation of ordinary decisions. Vrakka mothers changed den entrances after storms. Injured adults accepted help from particular pack members and refused others. Young animals practiced hunting with blunt pieces of wood. Packs exchanged root medicines at territorial boundaries without merging. Intelligence stopped being a courtroom surprise and became daily life. Oren published a paper titled "Error Before Evidence." It began with his statement that the vrakka could not count. The final section documented 12 distinct timing behaviors, including the surgical pulse sequence that had saved the female's spine. Tessa found him rereading the published copy late one evening. "Regret?" she asked. "Accuracy. I worry that public praise will turn my correction into heroism. I was wrong in ways that harmed living beings. Admitting it was an obligation, not courage." "Then keep admitting it when people applaud." Humans make moral repair sound simple. We make everything sound simple after someone else does the hard part. Peary entered carrying a new field proposal. She wanted to test whether burial arrangements preserved individual identity through scent, object shape, or location. The protocol required years rather than months and might produce no clean answer. Orrin approved it. The first anniversary of the Institute breach arrived without a ceremony. Tessa spent the morning training rescue recruits. She showed them the cracked restraint floor, the hidden cells, and the conduit scar where her hand had burned. One recruit asked what technique had made the vrakka trust her. "None," Tessa said. "But you changed your posture before the bite. That reduced pressure. It didn't buy trust. You protected Peary. So did the vrakka. Then why did it return with the antidote?" Tessa looked through the archive window toward the forest. Because she decided the first bite was enough. If you turn that decision into a technique you believe you can reproduce, you'll repeat Ven's mistake with kinder language. Our job is not to control the answer. Our job is to leave room for one. The recruits carried that lesson into the field. The new philosophy faced one more public test before the first year ended. A storm crossed the western range during a school ecology visit. The group had remained outside vrakka territory, accompanied by trained guides and weather drones. A sudden ground fracture divided the trail. 11 students reached shelter. 1 did not. The missing child was Celery, 8 years old and small enough to disappear beneath the glassroot ferns. Wind disabled aerial sensors. Rain erased heat traces. Search teams could enter only from the south, because floodwater had opened old Aegis cache tunnels along the northern ridge. The child's father begged Tessa to send trained vrakka after her. "They aren't trained," Tessa said. "They found the blood samples. They chose to approach them. Then ask them to choose again." His desperation held no disrespect, only fear. Tessa understood both. She carried the child's jacket to the passive boundary marker and transmitted the distress pattern used during the winter outbreak. Search teams waited while the storm deepened. No vrakka came. After an hour, the governor authorized teams to cross the den boundary. Tessa refused to lead them along the nursery route. Instead, she used the old drainage maps to direct rescuers through abandoned institute tunnels. Critics accused her of valuing predator boundaries over a child's life. "A forced entry may trigger an attack and still fail to find her," Tessa told the command channel. "Respect is part of the rescue plan, not an obstacle to it." The teams entered through the southern channels. Tessa searched with Varro and Peary. Water rose above their ankles. Glass branches broke in the wind, filling the forest with sounds like distant windows shattering. Twice, they found the child's tracks and lost them where runoff crossed the trail. At nightfall, a vrakka call sounded from the north. Another answered near the ground fracture. Tessa did not feel warmth in her blood. The receptors were already gone. She relied on the acoustic map Orrin had built from patient observation. Calls moved in a narrowing circle. "They are searching," Peary said. "Maybe. You still refuse certainty." "Certainty is how Ven stopped looking." They followed without crossing the boundary. 20 minutes later, the young vrakka with pale shoulder stripes appeared on a ridge. It carried the missing child's field bag. The animal set the bag down and walked away, then looked back. "That invitation seems clear," Varro said. They followed. The young vrakka led them through a flood channel to a hollow beneath an overturned glass tree. The child lay inside, wet and shivering but alive. The adult female had curled around her, shielding the opening from rain. 2 juveniles rested against the child's legs. The father arrived behind the rescue medics. He stopped at the sight of the predator around his daughter. Fear pulled him forward and held him back at once. Tessa approached slowly. The adult smelled her and lifted one foreleg. The child crawled free. Her father caught her against his chest. It found me when the tree fell, the child whispered. I was scared, so it stayed far away. Then I got cold. Did it bite you? A medic asked. The child looked offended. No, the little ones chewed my boot. The vrakka family withdrew before cameras arrived. Public debate changed overnight. Some citizens called the rescue proof that vrakka could be trained for search operations. Security companies offered contracts. One proposed raising juveniles in settlements to create dedicated rescue packs. Tessa rejected every proposal. They helped because a member of their world was in danger, she said. Turning that help into compulsory service would punish generosity. Build a relationship in which they can keep choosing and accept that sometimes the answer will be no. The child's father supported her. He funded new weather shelters at the forest boundary and designed them with entrances large enough for local wildlife. The missing child's class returned months later, not to meet the vrakka, but to repair storm markers and learn why distance could be a form of care. The pale-striped young vrakka watched them from the trees. No one approached it. At the end of the visit, the students left a damaged field bag beside the boundary marker. By morning, it had disappeared. Weeks later, Peary's remote camera recorded the bag in a burial arrangement surrounding an old weather drone. The center labeled the behavior unresolved. Tessa labeled that progress. 1 year after the bite, Tessa returned to the western clearing alone. She carried no food, transmitter, or medical sample. A small field pack held water and a repair kit. The 2 puncture scars on her forearm had faded to pale circles. Her blood no longer responded to infrasonic calls. That was why she had come. She wanted to know whether recognition survived without chemistry. Tessa sat on a black stone outside the den boundary. Wind moved through glass leaves. Blue insects floated above the stream. Hours passed. Near sunset, a vrakka appeared between the trees. It was the juvenile, though it no longer looked small. Pale stripes crossed its shoulders. The animal approached with the awkward confidence of something still growing into 6 powerful legs. Tessa remained still. The young vrakka smelled her boots, jacket, hands, and the old scars. It clicked once toward the forest. The adult female emerged. Her surgical mark had become a silver line. She moved without a limp. 2 younger juveniles followed beneath her body, born after the return. Tessa's chest tightened. The female stopped beyond arm's reach. No chemical warmth answered in Tessa's blood. No scanner translated the call. Human and predator faced each other, with only memory between them. Tessa lowered her gaze and opened one hand. The vrakka crossed the remaining distance. She placed her snout against Tessa's palm. Then she stepped away. Tessa expected the meeting to end. The female walked toward the trees, stopped at the den boundary, and looked back. The pale-striped young animal waited beside her. Neither called. An invitation could be mistaken as easily as a warning. Tessa considered every rule she taught recruits. Do not project. Do not assume proximity is permission. Do not follow a wild predator into an enclosed space because the moment feels meaningful. The female returned, hooked one tusk gently beneath the strap of Tessa's field pack, and tugged toward the forest. That is unusually specific, Tessa said. She followed. The vrakka did not take her into the nursery. They moved along a shallow trail between the public boundary and the deeper dens. Adults watched from elevated roots. Young animals wrestled beneath chiming branches. One old vrakka lay in a warm mineral pool while another placed pale medicinal root beside its head. No one performed for the human. Pack life continued around her. The female led Tessa to the burial chamber Oren had recorded during the escape. Its stone arrangements had changed. New circles surrounded pieces of control anchors recovered from the forest. A charred fragment of the suppression beacon occupied the center. Beside it lay a strip of gray fabric. Tessa recognized the torn sleeve from her field jacket. The fabric still held 2 dark punctures. She crouched without touching it. The vrakka had preserved the object among memories of pain, death, and broken control. Tessa could not know whether the sleeve represented a threat, a rescue, a debt, or simply the day the female returned with her young. The need to choose one interpretation belonged to humans. The object could carry several truths. The pale-striped youngster approached the arrangement and placed the damaged school field bag beside the sleeve. It adjusted the bag twice, unhappy with the angle, then stepped back. Tessa covered a laugh with her hand. The adult clicked at her. "Sorry, your filing system is very dignified." The animal nudged a loose black stone toward Tessa's boot. She picked it up. Every instinct wanted to place it beside the sleeve, to join the arrangement and leave proof that she had understood. But she did not understand the rules. Good intentions could still rearrange a memory that was not hers. Tessa set the stone exactly where it had been. The vrakka watched, then moved it herself. She placed it between the strip of sleeve and the broken beacon. Choice followed by correction. The pattern that had changed the institute was still happening in small movements on a cave floor. When the female turned back toward the clearing, Tessa followed without trying to see the nursery tunnels. The pack allowed her to leave as quietly as she had entered. At the boundary, the young vrakka ran ahead. The 2 smaller juveniles chased it, striking glass ferns that rang like bells. Their mother waited beside Tessa until all 3 disappeared across the stream. A distant adult released the double pulse, and 3 clicks Orin associated with her. Calls repeated it across the valley. Tessa could not feel the sound in her blood, but she knew its rhythm. She tapped it against her own chest, 2 slow beats, 3 quick ones. The female's ears shifted forward. Tessa repeated the pattern, not as a translation and not as a claim. It was only the closest sound her body could make. The vrakka answered once. Night gathered between the trees. Tessa knew she should return before the trail vanished. She also knew departure did not require pretending the moment was smaller than it felt. "Thank you for coming back," she said. The female touched the scars one last time, then joined her young at the stream. Tessa watched until the black glass leaves stopped moving. She walked back beneath the first stars. The forest no longer seemed silent simply because she lacked the receptors that had once translated vibration into warmth. Claws moved beyond sight. Juveniles clicked near the water. Glass leaves carried pieces of distant calls farther than her ears could follow. At the ridge, her field slate connected to the center and requested a contact report. The form offered familiar classifications: approach, avoidance, aggression, feeding, conditioned response. None fit. Tessa entered a new line. Independent reunion. Boundaries maintained by both participants. No sample collected, no behavior requested, meaning unresolved. She attached no photograph. The memory inside the den did not belong on a public screen merely because she had been allowed to see it. Piri replied within seconds, despite the late hour. "You found her." Tessa looked back at the dark trees. "She found me too," she typed. The center accepted the report without asking for proof. A year earlier, the Institute would have demanded a captured animal, a blood vial, a repeatable stimulus, and a demonstration before witnesses. Now the absence of those things could itself show that contact had occurred without possession. Tessa closed the slate. She thought of the observation theater and 28 scientists waiting for a deadly predator to behave exactly as their files predicted. They had watched teeth enter human flesh and believed the event was already finished. Their certainty lasted until the animal returned. Everything that followed, the rescue, the forest calls, the trial, the clinic, and this quiet walk beneath alien stars, existed because a living creature had been allowed one decision, no classification expected. Tessa touched the pale scars through her sleeve. They no longer carried venom, neutralizer, or any chemical trace the scanners could detect. What remained was not immunity. It was responsibility, to remember that survival had come from another mind, and to build systems humble enough to recognize the next impossible choice before someone tried to cage it. The choice had survived.